And Omkar is said to be the sound form. If you look into it, that gave rise to the universe. Well, 432, the sun, the earth, 396, and the moon, 108. Guess what they add up to? 936.
Six.
Mind blowing. You know, when these things started happening and they started arising, because I knew I wasn't generating it, I can't say to you how it felt. It felt very bizarre. At first, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep quiet about this because Simran isn't where we sit there and start thinking and marveling at whatever, is happening in our mind. Simran is actually a turning away that only happens when our heart is very in love with Guru Sahib. Now, I believe 108, that intention, that manifest fiveness, the pentagon, and then the dodecahedron, right? And therefore the pentagram, right? They're all just implications. I believe that represents Nam. Maharaj has given us vibrational technology for a reason when it comes to Nam. But what I'm saying is that there's a whole new modality that we should look at. Maharaj is blessed with novel mathematical discoveries. So it turns out that the side slope angle of the Pyramid of Giza, 51.84 degrees, is the sun's tilt angle in Gurmukhi. And by the way, the sun tilts at 7.2 degrees. So the discovery I made was that, again, self-generative mathematics, self-generative, the sign of a perfect creator. That one thing leads to another and it just happens. And it's just mind-blowing how it is even intrinsically integral. Like you can't find a beginning or the end, right? Because there is no beginning or end. That's the clue. When we look at the fact that imperialism chose to name cities as capital cities, chose to name letters as capital letters, that's what's being seized. So this is a battle for consciousness, to seize a language via these letters, to seize a place by taking the capital city, because that's where all the money flows from. And roads were understood as blood vessels. Now, when I say simulate, there's two terms there. Sim, which means the name, Nam, Greek logos,
Similarly.
Aramaic Tahanji, Simran. Oh, do you know what? I hadn't made that connection. And that's why Sangat is important.
Hey everyone, before we begin the podcast, I just want to give a quick overview that this is a longer podcast over 3 hours, so get ready to strap in. I do want to say that if you are sensitive in nature like me, as the conversation progresses, we may touch on slightly sensitive topics as we go deeper into the nature of the human psyche, the human nature. So please also have an open mind and open heart as you go in. Unlike previous podcasts, which had more of a cohesive structure, this podcast is more intuitive in nature. So just like a spiral dynamic, like the galaxy, like nature, the conversation flows in that regard. So again, go in with an open mind and open heart. Some topics may challenge your belief system. It's an illuminating dialogue, so hold the space there and use it as a tool to sharpen your discernment as well. Again, I'm very grateful for Athma Singh for giving his insights, and I really hope you enjoy this podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to Illuminating Dialogues number 36. We really have the pleasure to sit down and talk to, I know, right?
That's your shop, I didn't know that.
Atma Singh Paisab today, and you'll find out why it was a shock with 36 later. And we're recording this at 8 on the 28th GMT as well, so a lot of numbers there. And you'll find out why. So Athma Singh is an intuitive scholar sharing novel mysticism, geometry, math, science, etymology, scripture, semiotics, and much, much more. I was first introduced via Kamrup Singh's live streams, and we had a previous dialogue with Dr. Kamrup Singh before. So I'm very, very grateful to sit down with you today and hopefully go into all of the wisdom of Gurbani, but hopefully from another angle, having with etymology, with mathematics for those who are mathematically inclined, and numerology, and hopefully the way we use language, the geometry even of the solar system, Ik Oankar, our music system, and even perhaps the language we use every day, and we don't even realize its impact on us. So before we dive into all of that, this podcast is called Illuminating Dialogues. It's really a space for us to journey together to a place we haven't gone before and hopefully illuminate ourselves and hopefully the listeners in the process as well. So, with that being said, my first question to you is, what lights you up?
Guru Sahib, really. I've just got an obsession with Gurbani, really, you could say. Also, the way that Guru Sahib illuminates everything else around us. So, you mentioned it's the 36th episode, and we're going to be talking about that later. Note that the word Sikh has ik inside it. So, what I guess I'm saying is that what really interests me is how, as a Sikh, we learn of the ik through all things. And that's essentially what Sikhi means to me. It means the return to oneness through the journey of multiplicity, incarnation.
Amazing. So,
Mm.
we're going to go hopefully super deep in this episode for people. But before we go into the depths, those who might not be mathematically inclined, intuitively inclined, um, yeah, geometrically inclined, if you can say that.
Yeah, you could.
Open your hearts, open your minds, because this will have a lot of figures compared to previous episodes. This will be more intuitive. We're going to be approaching Gurbani from also a mathematical perspective. So if it doesn't land the first time, it might not even impact your worldview, the way you even see the world. So open your minds in this regard, and yeah, allow allow yourself just to be immersed in the wisdom Baisav has to offer us today. So shall we start um how Gurbani starts, which is ik.
Oh, so ik, ik. So we have Guru Nanak Sahib Ji start with a number. Um, Now that's quite fascinating because whereas words you can argue are subjective, numbers are objective. So if I was an alien from, the planet Zubla from the other side of the universe, or I was from planet Earth, um, in terms of mathematics, it's much more clearer what's being referred to when we deal with numbers as opposed to words. Okay, so Guru Sahib does something really amazing. He uses a number, ik. And then Maharaj gives us this unique, what I can only call a glyph, because I can't reduce it just to a letter or a word. It's many things. Some pronounce it as Onkar, some pronounce it as Onkar, but essentially we can say that it's some kind of extension of the Indic sound form Om. But we have to also say it's unique. It's a brand new sound form that incorporates that. Now, why is this fascinating? Well, it's fascinating because if we take that ik, we can write that as a word. And if we wrote that as a word, we would have to write idi kakka. Now, idi is a third letter, and kakka is the sixth letter. It's the 36th episode today. And I think I now know, because it was a shock to me, why Paisal has chosen the 36th episode, because not only does 3, 6 give us 9, and for those paying attention, what I'm referring to there via that triplicate is what is called academically vortex mathematics, but some people will call it the Tesla numbers. Although it's arguable that Tesla ever came up with those numbers, because I've looked for the evidence and I actually can't find a bona fide source. So we have 3 ED and 6 Kakka, giving us either 36, if you look at it that way, or 9, or 3, 6, 9. You can look at it this way. Okay. Now, what's amazing is that when you look at the Gurmukhi alphabet, and know that Gurmukhi means from the enlightener, the light ur, which emerges from the gu. Ur is in a Semitic sound form that means light. And muk means mouth, or face.
Mm.
So there's this impression of the formless giving rise. Now, there's actually 35, and this is what you'll see mentioned, whether it's scholars historically or online. There's 35 Penti. Penti, ironically, sounds a lot like Pentagon, by the way, but anyhow, there's Penti letters, which is 35. However, we have to account for Onkar. Now, note that Onkar looks like Ura. Now, Ura is the first letter, and it's made up of the name Ura, of the first letter, yeah, Ura, and the last, the 35th letter, Rara.
Mm.
So the term Ura gives us the first letter and the 35th letter. Now, 1 plus 35 equals 36. While the first, the alpha, and the last, the omega. The Greeks said omega for a reason. Their last letter, omega, sounds a lot like om, doesn't it? Story for another day. Now, when you look at this is quite interesting, because even the word ura, to go slightly deeper, if I take the kanna off the end and just use the two letters that gave us 36, it looks like the word or. Now, if I say Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or Vahi Or, I've actually quoted in the original Hebrew the line, and then God said, "Let there be light," and then there was light. So the term or in Hebrew means light. Yeah, it appears 36 times in the Old Testament. Now, another thing that ancient Jews believe is they believe that if it wasn't for 36 enlightened souls who enjoy the Shekinah, which means the presence of the formless creator. Note how Shekinah sounds a bit like Sachkhand, that have very similar sound forms. They believe that if it wasn't for these 36, they've got a name for them. They call them the Tzadik Nistarim. We won't go into it today, but the word Nistari and Nistar is actually in Gurbani, but that's a talk for another day. They believe that earth would collapse under the weight of sins. They state that basically, if it wasn't for these souls, the sin on planet earth would mean that earth would be destroyed. Now, here's what's crazy. We've talked obviously about Gurmukhi, we've talked about the number 36, but Gurbani has 36 authors. In fact, the term author encodes the term light, as in, that which gives rise to something.
Wow.
Through words. And it so happens that in terms of gurus are 6. That's the square root of 36. So this goes deeper, because now we have this 1 to 35, but we have to accept, we have to put Onkar somewhere. And I place it as the last intuitively. That gives us 36. That gives us 36 actual glyphs that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji gave us, right from Ura, which is 1 plus 35 equals 36, to Onkar, which is an extension of that and is the 36th. So you can see how I'm using logic numerically to slot this in, the alpha and the omega, okay? Now, here's what's really also beautiful. It doesn't just end there. Note that when we make ik, we have to make sifar, which is Gurmukhi 0. Now, sifar, the word, if you add up the letters sasa, fa, and rara, it equals 63, which is the inverse of 36, which is ik. So there's this sense of going one way, 63, and then going anti-clockwise, which is 36. There's this sense of motion of the numbers going in the 0, sifar equals 63, sasa, fa, rara. But when you're drawing ik, you have to draw sifar, which equals 63. And then you have to go anti-clockwise like this. Then you make ik, which is 36, which is the inverse of 63. We won't talk about how the inverse of certain numbers adds up to 99 today, but that in itself is significant, because if we take ik, the value of it to be 9, which we can, because ik is ed kakka, 3 plus 6 equals 9, then actually 63 plus 9 gives us 72. Now, 72 is the ancient Hebrew number for God. They believe that if God were to have a number, it'd be 72. That can be Googled by people reading. Now, this word or, it appears in Gurbani as or orak, and it means the extent of something. Orak apara take ved again ikavat in Japji. And by the way, when Maharaj is there, you says again. No, that's a different line I'm thinking of. We won't go on to that. But this reference to the number six, and then 36 as in six to the six squared, or six to the power of two. This is also mathematically significant, because if we have to recognize that these numbers in themselves, they have many deep meanings. I've mentioned 72, so let's say, well, where else does it appear? Well, if you take Gobind Singh, Gobind Singh equals 72. If you take the fifth Guru's name, Arjan, there is no second part. Arjan equals 72.
Wow.
There's many ways it's repeated. Now, let's go back to the Hebrew tradition and say, okay, let's see if more light can be shed on this number 36. And we mentioned six Gurus. Well, in Genesis, which is the first chapter of the Torah, which has five, again, a pentagon. We're talking about 36, which is the apex angle of the pentagram, fiveness. So Sangatji, anyone who doesn't understand what I mean, when you draw a pentagon which represents fiveness, and you connect all the internal corners, the angles, all of which are 108, by the way, which is 36 times 3. What you get is you get a pentagram, and this what people often call the sublime apex is the tips of the triangles. They're all 36 degrees. All of them are 36 degrees. So the sense of 36 arises. So whether we're talking about five Panj Pyare, whether we're talking about Panj Pyare standing around a bhatta formed like a pentagon essentially, whether we're talking about the fact that the walkway of the Darbar Sahib extends from the equatorial latitude by 36 degrees, Sangatji. And Akal Takat, I think we can answer why it's angled at a strange angle, because it just so happens that Akal Takat is angled at 72 degrees. Which give us a last and final and only other angle of the pentagram, which is 108 degrees. So I've thrown a lot of numbers there, but if the Sangat really want to understand this, they can just draw a pentagram in front of them. That in itself will help them visualize a lot of things. They'll understand that what I'm really saying is that in a universe of 5 elements, Panch Tat, Panch Ut, if we want to call them that, what we have is we have a formless creator who decides to create as balanced fiveness. And the only way you can create as balanced fiveness, going into geometry now, because that's what we're dealing with in time and space, as structure unfolds, it unfolds as geometry. Then what you have is you have 108 degrees. You can call 108 degrees the divine intention of a formless creator who operates as through 5 elements. You'll note in Gurbani that Guru Sahib often refers to 4 elements by name: Bahan, Bahani, Agni, Bahatal. Notice that out of these 4 lower resonant elements, 3 of them start with the term ba, ba, ba. But ba is the only letter that is exactly the same as a number in all of the Gurmukhi alphabet.
And what we can do here is we can put like the you can send me maybe an image afterwards, and we can put an image here, so the viewers can also see visual representation. And I think what you've laid out so far for the viewers is the significance in our Gurbani that Guru Nanak has laid out, and through other gurus, of the almost the geometry and the numerological significance. And hopefully we'll get into the cosmological significance as well. But
that would be the next step. Would be good, the cosmological, to talk about the sun, the moon, and the earth.
Because right now I think some people's worldviews is that is very we're not very open mathematically to understand Gurbani in that way, but to understand it. And I think in the Western world we've seen like Dr. Edward Grant talking about it from the Western perspectives, but actually looking at Gurbani from a mathematical point of view and realizing how the sacred geometry is and how beautiful that runs through so many different elements. It's not something I've ever heard before.
It's funny you mention Robert Edward Grant. Me and him have communicated in the past. And one of the things he did was, through Guruji's Kirpa, he verified that I had made through Guruji's Kirpa, I've made several novel mathematical discoveries. And he verified that I had made a one in particular. He helped me in that sense. And it was the fact that the pentagram actually builds itself in a way that hasn't been observed before. And that is to say that if you imagine a pentagon and imagine the 5 points of the triangle, it just so happens that this base of each of the 5 points, it just so happens that that would represent 1 unit, that would represent 2 units, and that would represent 3 units. So the way the actual triangle is built up is 1 unit, 2 units, and 3 units. So let's just pretend that from here to here is 36 millimeters.
Yes.
Then let's pretend from there to there is 72, because that's 36, 36. That would mean this has to be 108. Now, if I draw a line that is 72 millimeters, and then a line in the middle, the 36 point, 36, 36, upwards of 108, it makes that perfect angle of a pentacle. People will often call that pentacle. Apparently that wasn't known to mathematics before. And this is all because Guru Nanak Sahib Ji uttered ik. I would never have discovered any of this if it wasn't for the fact, because this goes very deep. So if we look at the fact that Maharaj is actually making a cosmological commentary, and Ik Onkar is actually a cosmological key, and I can prove that. Now remember that when I've mentioned Ik, for instance, constantly, I've mentioned 72. I'm going to continue doing that by saying, well, let's mention 108 for a moment. Now, I believe 108, that intention, that manifests fiveness, the pentagon, and then the dodecahedron, right? And therefore the pentagram, right? They're all just implications. I believe that represents Nam numerically. Now, if we take all of the Guru's first names, so Nanak, Angad, Amar, you get the idea, yeah, right? The first letters, and then for Guru Granth Sahib Ji starts with 1. So we'll allocate the name 1 for Guru Granth Sahib Ji. The fact that Guru Granth Sahib Ji is the 11th, 1 is nice. Yeah, it starts with ik, so 1. Now, Nanna would be 25 because it's a 25th letter. Angad would be 2. Amar, it would be 2, and so on and so forth, right? And then Gobind would be 8, right? And then Guru Granth Sahib would be 1. If you add those 11 digits together, you get 108. Now, in my opinion, that's not a coincidence, in my opinion. And it's not a coincidence that ik, one aspect of ik, is it gives us a third of 108. Now, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this yet, but Gurbani states that there were 36 aeons before creation. You could argue the light manifested. Now, in ancient Judaic tradition, they believe that the light of creation was only revealed for 36 hours. Now, I've shown that when you draw a pentagram on the clock, we won't go too deeply into this just yet. We'll go back into the basic cosmology, but it's worth saying that when we draw a pentagram on the clock, the fourth point hits the 36th minute. And if you were to lay out the elements, that would be element fire. This goes very deep because it's the 36th minute. Now, 36 is 6 times 6. And if you note that from 0, it's 216 degrees, because yes, it's the 36th minute, but 36 minutes equals 36 minutes, i.e. 6-degree increments. 36. So you have 216 degrees, which is 6 times 6 times 6. Now, this term light, or it appears in Genesis, the idea of seed, the first chapter, 5 books in the Torah. So this fiveness just goes on and on and on. In the first Genesis, what happens is that it's mentioned 6 times. But in the Torah, overall, it's mentioned 36 times. So 6 times 6, echoing this. I guess you could say this intersection I've shown between dodecahedral dynamics and time and space, trying to prove that Nam is what creates the duality of time and space, Gal. And if you look at that, it doesn't just stop there. So 6 times in Genesis, 36 times in the whole Torah. And then if you index all the terms that appear in the Old Testament, it would appear alphabetically as a 216th term. Remember 216 degrees? So this is significant because when Guru Sahib says 36 aeons and the 36th minute, right, is 216 degrees. Now, 260 degrees literally is 216 with a little 0 there for the degree symbol. Now, I noticed that. It just so happens that a zodiacal hour, which is like the 12-hour clock face in the sky, a zodiacal hour. So, for instance, we went through the age of Pisces, and according to some, we're going through the age of Aquarius. Aquarius sounds a lot like Echo, doesn't it? Interesting. The water bearer, interesting again. It just so turns out that a zodiacal hour is 2160 years.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to say something, and I've never shared this before publicly, not even on my Instagram page. I was going to mention it in the tract. Now, if I'm correct, we should be able to take those three divine angles. If this geometry is just explaining the universe to us in ways that we find hard to comprehend, then let's take that geometry and try to prove it further. So let's look at how Onkar actually encodes the combined radius of the sun, the moon, and the earth. Note that Shri Gautama Sahib, who Guru Gobind Singh Ji Buddha lists as the 23rd of Dad before the final, the 24th. Note that 0 point on a clock is not just the 12th hour, the 60th minute, it's also the 24th hour, right? It just so happens that that soul had said that three things shall not remain hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Now, I'm going to say that we come to the earth to find the truth. Earth is actually an anagram of the term ether, which is a Greek term for the divine element. And if you notice the term breath, breath just adds b, the second letter of the Hebrew tradition, to another anagram of ether. And these things aren't coincidences. So knowing that we come to planet Earth, the sun, the moon, and the truth, we may as well say the sun, the moon, and the earth. Now, I noted that. Now, if you look at now in future, I'll talk about why I believe that inches, increments, as I like to call them, which are probably from the Indic term kinchat, which means minute element, minute amount. We'll talk about in future why I think the inch, and then by inference the foot, and the yard. Notice how yard sounds like Yahweh, and the mile. I'll talk about why I believe they're divine units, but I won't for now. So you'll have to take my word for it, Sangatji. Now, what's beautiful is this. The moon goes around the earth goes around the sun. So let's start that way. Now, if you're going to take a measurement that is equidistant at every point you take it, you'll take the radius Ra, which means sun. Duus means to divide into Ra, Rav, Indic means sun. Ra, North African, Ra means sun. Ra means path. It's the original path that was taken before anyone else took a path, you could argue.
It's like the Egyptian god Ra.
And in the Indic path, Ra means path, right?
Okay. Wow. So many links.
You had a V. Av means to incarnate. And then you add a V, which is the sixth letter, Av. Av means to incarnate. Oh God, we're going too deep.
Amazing.
So I'll go down too many rabbit holes and the Sangat will feel like I'm confusing them, I feel. Okay, so if we take the fact that I'm saying that we're using the mile, and in future, I'm going to try to prove why I believe it's a divine unit. Right. And what I'm presenting only works with miles, which is to say it works with yards, feet, and inches, because they're the same thing, right? And just to let you know, remember I said that Sifr 0 is 6.3,
yes,
and Ik is 3.6. One of the clues that Maharaj gave me that the mile is a divine unit and therefore the foot and the inch is a divine unit is the fact that guess how many inches there are in a mile. Remember I said Sifr is 6.3 and Ik is 3.6? Yeah, in a mile, the inches are 6.3, 3.6.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Wow.
So it's this sense of the oneness coming out of the circularness and going back into itself. So I would say that Guru Nanak, not the countless, and notice that Guru Sahib finishes with the sixth glyph. I would say that what Guru Sahib has done is Guru Sahib has mesmerized me. It's what I feel has happened with a certain numerical paradigm. I mean, I'll give you a further example. It's accepted that the second Guru was born on the 18th of April. It's accepted that the ninth Guru was born on the 18th of April. When you look at what I'm in the future going to argue is the ideal solar calendar, 12 months of 30 days, and a 13th month of 5 days or 6 days, giving you a normal year 5 days, or a leap year 6 days, 365, 366. It's what they do here in Ethiopia. It's what came from North Africa, the Hermetic calendar. What I'm going to show is that one way of reading that It's 30 days in the first month, 30 days in the second month, 30 days in the third month, January, February, March, and then 18th of April, right? 18 days. Now, 18 looks a lot like a 108, doesn't it? With the zero taken out, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, that means 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 18th day equals 108th day of the year. So the 18th of April, by the way I've described it there, is the 108th day of the year. Now, that's the second Guru born on the 108th day of the year, and the ninth Guru born on the 108th day of the year. Yeah. Now, let's go to Guru Nanak. Now, some historians say that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was born on the 13th of April. Some people say that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was born on the 15th of April. I'm going to say that this is because the problem is trying to convert from the lunar calendar, which is the Bikramni in the Indic tradition, and the Hebrew tradition had a lunar calendar as well, to the solar calendar. And then there's days and there's changes, and we won't go into that. But it's really a real minefield trying to convert dates, yeah, for various reasons. Well, given historians have taken it back a few days from the 15th, I'm going to argue, well, let's just pretend it could be the 18th that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was born. In my opinion, spring Vaisakhi is what we're talking about, is actually the true new year, by the way, as well, because that's when life begins. Winter, January the 1st, when everything's dead, is not when life begins. A new year does not begin. So note that a neck, not the countless, encodes the term ek at the end. When we say Sikh, we're learners of the ik. So by side, we were talking about the different ways that these numbers occur. Okay,
Yes.
so if we look at Guru Nanak, and we've already mentioned the walkway, we mentioned Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. Okay, let's take the advent of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. The advent of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji gives us 1469. The Maharaj, descended into mortal form, right? The ascended mortal form. And note that Maharaj's body wasn't in the end cremated or buried. And in the Semitic tradition, when that happens, they say that was an angelic soul. That prophet wasn't actually a normal kind of, that was an angelic soul. So it's interesting that the Semitic tradition would interpret Guru Nanak Sahib Ji as some kind of angelic soul, because there was no funeral body, that the body was like an apparition an angel had taken on, essentially, right? So we have 1469 and we have 1539. So I want Sangat to accept that 6939 is clearly 4 digits that encode 369. However, 69 plus 39 equals 108, which is beautiful. For those also paying attention, this 69, this idea of 69 is fascinating because it's yin yang.
Yes.
And remember that when I mentioned the so-called testa triplica earlier, although like I say, I can't find any proof you mentioned it, these numbers themselves as a triplicate give us all 3 pentagonal angles. Look at this, Sangatji. 3 plus 3 equals 36 degrees. 6 plus 6 gives us 72 degrees. 9 plus 9 gives us 108 degrees. Notice that ik looks like 9. It looks blatantly like the number 9. In fact, in Devanagari, which is what is used to encode Sanskrit numbers, the number 9 in Sanskrit is just a reversal of their number 1. Maharaj didn't change the Devanagari so-called Sanskrit number 1 very much, very little. But Maharaj changed the number 9, conversation for another day, massively. But the original Devanagari is just a flipping of the number 1.
Interesting.
So we get this idea that after 9, everything returns into oneness. Now look at the counting system. 0 is a scaling factor. Now, with that in mind, let's go back to how Guru Sahib, as in we repeat numbers after we go after every 0, 10, and then 11, and then 21, and then 31, and you get back through the digits. Now, if we look at cosmology, what did I mean that the 23rd of Thar is essentially referred to the 24th teacher, the final teacher, Ik looks like 9, right? And Iri Kaka adds up to 9. So let's give that the value 9 there. And Onkar is the 36th glyph, right? We've agreed that earlier. That gives us 936. Now, when you take the moon, its radius, so its measurement equidistance from the center, as it sings itself into creation through Guruji's Kirpa, manifests, right? It is 1080 miles. 1080 miles. So this is the moon, which is something solid. lower resonant, a rock,
Yes.
reflecting light back. You would see the moon as well reflecting back. Now, the sun's radius is 432,000 miles. So
Mm.
we've got two numbers there. We've got 108 and 432.
Which is like
Now, what's
hertz, like the
Hanji?
music. It's like the music hertz, yeah.
Hanji. So VG is referring to the fact that up until the Italians essentially standardized the musical bass frequency as 440 hertz. Hertz just means per second, named after a person who essentially invented it. It sounds like a German person. Um, that it was actually, it seems to be, I mean, there's evidence either way, if I'm going to be very frank
Mhm.
about it. It seems to be that 432 hertz was acknowledged as almost the frequency behind creation. I'm going to argue it's because it's by divine design, because the sun is 432,000 miles. Now, why is this beautiful? Because if you draw a pentagon, you have 108 degrees, 108 degrees, 108 degrees, 108 degrees, 108 degrees. In other words, you have 108 degrees 5 times. Now, imagine the moon is one of them. Now, the sun would be these four, because 108 plus 108 plus 108 plus 108 is 432. And the
Mhm.
moon reflecting light back is 108. So we have this sense of something creating light which has no form, because the sun is not a rock; it has no solid core. And by the way, the term core, or core, the center of something, encodes the Hebrew term for light.
Yeah.
Um, now, however, it produces light. Now, the moon doesn't produce any light, yet it reflects light. Now, in my opinion, this is not by coincidence. The name Nanak is actually a doubling of the moon cycle, which is 28 days. 56 Nanak equals 56, which is a doubling of 28. In future, we'll talk about this, but when people understand certain numbers, I don't actually talk about very many numbers. I actually probably only talk about 10 to 20 different numbers, you know. I'm actually going
Mm.
to count it one day. So it's not like I'm picking out whichever numbers suit me. But 28 is significant, not just by chance. Check this out, Sangatji. There are 7 days in a week for a reason. Why? Because the ancients used to measure a month by 28 days. That
Mm.
would give them 4 weeks of 7 days. Now, if I do 4 times 7, everyone knows that's 28 days. It's a lunar month. But what
Mm.
most people don't realize is if you do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, you get 28.
Okay. Wow.
So 7 days in a week and 4 weeks make 28 days. But if you add 1 to 7, you get 28. So sevenness in itself is encoding 28. Now, 28 itself is the doubling of 7, 7, 14, 28, and then we get Nanak 56.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we see all of these like fractal patterns. So for the viewers watching, it's like we're almost proving mathematically about our calendar system and our time, because I don't know exactly how our calendar system got formed, like the Gregorian, the Western world. But this is very important because the way we operate in time, the way people have their 9 to 5 works, the way we work with the seasons, the way we effectively see time is currently, I feel, not divine, but this is unlocking this divine aspect to realize, okay, the whole universe works in that fractal way. How can we align ourselves to that fractal pattern? And I think proving in this sense just opens our mind to that possibility. And also that the solar system, like you said, the sun, the moon, the earth, the way that whole fractal pattern works, it kind of shows that that our body, our mind, everything is also working in a fractal way in order to
From
evolve and grow from egg, in order to evolve and grow. So we're in this
oh,
system in order to evolve and grow, and effectively not in a system that is like a linear system, but more like a fractal system. So I feel like in a practical sense, we should also acknowledge that also the way we live should also be aligned to the fractal nature of the universe, that we are here as a Dharamsal.
right. And on that note, when, for instance, we say that this universe is a simulation, the term sim
Mm.
is actually a Hebrew term. So sim and Shem, so Hashem in Hebrew means the name. So when we say Semitic, we may as well say Shemitic as well, because what it means is sim means name. Now, when I say simulate, there's two terms there: sim, which means the name, nam, है ना? Greek
Yes.
logos,
Simran.
Aramaic Tahanji, Simran. Oh, Vaheguru. You know what? I hadn't made that connection. And that's why Sangat is important. You see, you've made such an obvious connection. See, in the past, I thought, right, Simran is beautiful. Say the correct way, Mar, to die in your heart, Rana. So we're gonna do Simran. We're gonna die the correct way in our heart. And you just come along and said Sim, Rana. Then this is how you put the Nam within the heart. Vaheguru, Vaheguru, Tahana, Tahana, Tahana Guru Sangha, Tahana, Tahana, Tahana Guru Sangha, Tahana, Tahana, Tahana Guru Sangha. That's beautiful. You've blown my mind there. You see, anyone who thinks Nana Katana, Karara, Karara, Sar. Sar means water, it means iron, and it encodes breath. Anyone, but also, Maharaj is saying, right? But anyone who wants to trace breadcrumbs here, we just united blood through three substances there. But anyway, Maharaj is saying there, anyone who wants to try to describe the truth will end up finding out that it's like chewing iron. Because anyone who thinks they're actually ultimately describing Vaheguru is going to have a downfall. Those who are mesmerized by Vaha, the wondrous nature of Vaheguru, they constantly fall, more and more into Nim Rata. Nima means to go low, Rata means to be saturated, Rata means blood. Which carries a breath around our body. So going back to the cosmological model of the pentagon, so we have this sense of a pentagon. Now let's fit planet Earth, because if I'm right, we have to fit planet Earth. Now, if you draw the whole pentagon, it just so happens that the sun that I was saying is four of these angles: 108, 108, 108,
Mm-hmm.
or 432 minus 36 ik 36. Yeah, which is
Mm.
each of the 5 points is 36 degrees. Yeah, right. 432 minus 36 gives us 396. In other words, a cipher for 396 miles. Because yes, Sangatji, the Earth's radius is 396 miles. Notice how that combines the numbers of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's descendants into mortal form and ascendants from mortal form. In other words, those digits. Now, here's the mind-blowing thing. Note that 396 miles, 396, is clearly an anagram of 936. Now, we got 936 from Ik Onkar, right? Now, that in itself is pretty mind-blowing and pretty cool. But here's where it all adds up in a mind-blowing way. So we've placed the sun on 4 points of the pentagon. We've completed it with the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the top of the pentagram where there's 36, we put Earth. Why? Because 432 minus 36 equals 396. So we've got the radius in miles of all our three triplicate system from this. And not just that, 369, if we take the middle number, 6 times 66 is 396 planet Earth. So there's this sense that we have to come to planet Earth to learn of the one. Yeah, and after all, Earth is the final lower resonant element before we go into Nam. I actually call Earth, I don't call it Earth. I call that, the understanding is lower, what I call lower resonant quantum congealed matter. I know that sounds powerful, but I promise you it's not. That concept can be explained quite briefly, but we won't do it right now. But when people say Earth, think of things sticking together and forming relationships.
So it's
Don't
essentially
think,
like a dense frequency plane in
thank
which
you,
to
thank you.
kind of evolve into a higher frequency state.
Da, to ascend in Sanskrit, Ram, the eternal, as in Ram, Vaheguru, Da Ram, Khand, the place where we Da ascend into Ram, the eternal peace. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought that might help. One of five Khands,
Hands.
planes of
Five
existence. And
again.
remember that the ancient Jewish teachings tell us that there are five planes of existence, bunch Khand. Um, so yeah, Bicep, sorry, I didn't want to jump in there, but I just wanted to just say that. You were going to say something, Bicep, aren't
No,
you?
I think exactly. So I think just the way we're operating, that is like even mathematical and it's like frequential that this is a
Oh,
place to go to Dharamkand. And I think you mentioned last time about do and da and even the way our language is constructed. Um,
Hanji.
and the vibration that that produces is so important as well. And I think you also, when we were speaking last time, we were talking about the different khans. So I think it could also be helpful just to mention the first two, um, for the Sangat, just to give some context on, yeah, the two khans.
Okay, so I think what Baisob is trying to get me to refer to is the fact that the cons in themselves. Um, so we have to be very careful here
Yes.
because someone like me trying to talk about this, there's a strong argument for saying I should shut my mouth.
Mhm,
Really,
mhm,
we could argue that in many ways, but also I think as long as the Sangat understand that everything I'm putting across are my limited opinions, they're a limited interpretation because everyone apart from Guru Sahib is limited of that which I consider unlimited, which is Gurbani. So please, Sangatji, don't think I'm trying to say this is the way. And you can say, oh, Jallo Athma Singh thinks this and he thinks that, and I'm happy to explain why. But please don't think that I'm trying to tell you how it is. And because Maharaj is a gum aboard, Maharaj is not given to understanding.
mhm. True.
Maharaj is not the realm of thought. So with that in mind, Dharam Khand, so how Dharam Khand is described is a place of very much physical things. So the solar system falls into Dharam Khand, for instance,
Mhm,
and then when we look at Gyan Khanda, Gya means to go. An means honor. So where do we go to get honor? Maharaj is essentially saying that we're going to have to essentially go through some kind of process of purification of our so-called knowledge. Now remember that when Maharaj talks about the three natures of reality, Rajotamo Sato, Maharaj says that we have to transcend these. You know, um, so, what was I going to say? I was trying to relate.
mhm.
It's very difficult to go back to the trunk of what I was saying when I've gone to too many branches and then twigs.
Gyan Khan.
Oh, thank you, Faisal.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, so what I'm essentially saying is that when you look at it, what's actually happening is that Guru Sahib is also showing us that this five nature of khands, whether we're going from lower resonance of the body into the mental, and then in future we can talk about the spiritual slightly more. This relates again to the idea of pentagonal dynamics. Um, so whether it's at a Ambar Sanchar, whether it's the amount of kakars, whether it's the amount of vikars, the Panjadut,
Mm,
there's this, and there's others as well that we can mention. There's this constant sense of fiveness. Even Guru Granth Sahib Ji's Bani, without nine, the ninth Guru. And by the way, 9 plus 99 equals 108. It was the fifth Guru who essentially codified Gurbani. It was just left for the 10th Guru to place the ninth
wow.
Guru's Bani.
Yeah,
Uh,
five Indras as well.
right.
Yeah,
And Arjan equals 72.
yeah.
5 times 72, the fifth Guru times 72 equals 360. And this is something I want to go back to. And before I do go back to this 36, 360 degrees, because this is what I'm saying that Maharaj is trying to explain to us the whole reason for why even a circle has 360 degrees. And it's related to why the pentagram has 36 degrees. In fact, it's only when you place it on a clock you start to get these understandings. So, for instance, if I accept that that's the 60-minute point because it's 0 and 60, if I admit that's a 12-hour point because it's 0 and 12, these are all 0 and beginning points. The sense of something circular that's going back into itself. Chatur Chakravarti,
Yeah.
Chatur Chakravarti, in four directions circularly, you manifest in four directions circularly. Only you yourself enjoy yourself. Um, you know, um, that is my mind is wanting to say things, but I don't want to go there. What I want to say is that Guru Sahib is essentially telling us that the first and fifth divine element is essentially Vaheguru, the formless, is manifesting in four directions. I can prove that on the clock of time and space. 12, the 0 point and the starting point. 12 times 3 is 36 degrees. 12 times 6 is 72 degrees. 12 times 9 is 108 degrees. And this is the four directions. Brahma, full face of Brahma, anyone? Um, and these words encode things. So Brahma encodes Barama, which means 12 months. In the Hebrew tradition, Bara is actually the second word of the whole Hebrew tradition. You can even say Christians and Muslims because they believe in the Old Testament. And the first two words, Bereshit bara, Elohim, means in the beginning God created. Now bara means 12. This
Wow.
goes so deep. If we say, well, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji stopped at the number 13, look, it's not just me that's obsessed with numbers. I could say, well, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji wouldn't stop. So we're interested in numbers, but we're not people that promote numerology. And we'll talk about that in future because of what numerology has now come to mean. So when
Okay.
Guru Nanak Sahib Ji stops at 13, I'm going to argue that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is at the center of that creation, essentially saying the dodecahedron, that the 13th formless is creating all this 12ness. Because it's the 12 faces of the dodecahedron that essentially are given us the clock of time and space, deconstructed and stacked. So this sense of from the ultimate reality going into two-dimensional or lower reality stacked, they give us the 12 faces, which are 12 pentagons times their 5 points. 12 times 5 is 60. So we have the sexagesimal system. And look how mind-blowing it gets. I tried to prove divine design, by making multiple points and then layering them. So now let's look at the clock and accept that that's not just 60. We proved that. That's not just 12. We've proved that. That equals 72, by the way, 60 plus 12. And note how 12 and 60 give us the numbers we need for an anagram of 2160, zodiacal age. But it doesn't just stop there. If we add that to 36, we get 108. 36 degrees of the pentagram hitting there. And not just that, if we just say, forget the 36 degrees, because when I draw the pentagram on the clock, which the Sangat will see now on screen. However, if you take it as 360 degrees, then 60 plus 12 plus 360 gives us 432, the radius of the sun, which gives rise to time and space in the lower resonance solar system. So it's as if it constantly keeps being given. Now, this goes deep. Maharaj uses certain names for the sun. One of these is Sur. Sur can mean angel. Sur essentially refers to consciousness arising, as in Surti. But Sur is also a name for the sun, and it's used in Gurbani as a name for the sun. And it's the fourth letter next to the 32nd letter, 432. It adds up to 36, 4 plus 32, but it encodes 432. That's mind-blowing. So now remember that when we stop trying to interpret, and I'm arguing we haven't been taking Guru Sahib literally enough, go darkness, rule light. We have to acknowledge that if I'm right and these sound forms and frequency are expanding and contracting, well, let's look at Sur. Sur backwards encodes Ru. Ru means light, gave rise to terms like roots, where a plant grows from, or the root where you find your way home. Yeah. And from the beginning, it gives Su. Su means void, or Shu. Shu or Su in the Indian tradition mean void. In fact, the word for zero is Shunya. When you shun someone, you treat them as zero. Yeah? Shudra, the lowest caste, zero. It's totally related to zero. So if we want to go very deep, you'll notice that Sikh encodes ik with sa and ha and sh coming out of the void.
Wow, so even like saying these words have a mathematical and cosmological significance, and that's now why I understand that the way we use language, and hopefully we'll speak about that
Oh,
later, is how we use language, how we talk to one
oh,
another, how we relate to our food and drink, our work, our family, our community has a presence. Because if we're talking to the lower caste people this way, or ourselves as Sikh, it actually has a fractal encoding that we're effectively putting out or
oh.
into ourselves to the universe. So the importance of speech and words, right?
And this is especially important because, and remind me in a minute to go back to 936, because I haven't told us
Okay.
something more going yet. But this can be proved now scientifically. They've done studies. They've taken mice, this point that Bicep makes about the way words affect us. They took some mice, they cloned these mice. They had the same mice in two different cages. These mice, they did a buzzing noise, and then shortly after the buzzing noise, they electrocuted them. These mice, they did a buzzing noise, and then after the buzzing noise, nothing happened. After a while, as you can imagine, these mice started to get scared just from the buzzing noise. Essentially, same as Pavlov's experiment with the salivating dog.
Mm.
Was proved to be anticipating food and therefore showing a psychosomatic response to salivation, preempting the feeling of food, right? Well, these mice also started getting scared and nervous before they got buzzed. These mice never got hurt when they got buzzed, right? Now, what they then did was they created the progeny of these mice by by essentially breeding these mice with a female, right? And they did the same with these ones. So now you got progeny. Now, what do you think happened when they did a buzzer with these mice, the progeny?
They also got affected.
Okay, they didn't get
Oh, they
affected.
didn't.
Their previous generation hadn't got hurt by a buzzer.
Ah.
When they heard a buzzer, they didn't get affected. Now, the first group that I'd mentioned, remember that their previous generation, which was the same. So they're starting out with the same genetics. That's important. Notice how genetics is genesis. So it relates a lot to what we're talking about, you know. So what happened with the first group was that even though that these progeny from the same female, commonality, but different experience of the parents,
Oh, I
even
see.
though they hadn't heard a buzzer before, once they heard a buzzer, they started showing nervousness.
Okay.
Now, why is this important? This means that vibration sound, oral stimulation,
Oh.
notice that oral encodes the Hebrew term or, light. Yeah. In the same way that north is the only one of the directions. The one I choose is zero, not because I want to, because it is the zero in the beginning, the alpha and omega. It encodes or in the middle. When you realize that this mice model applied to humans, which has been proven to be very useful, we've got lots of behavioral issues, right? Then what you're saying is that let's just say that I'm an African American. My ancestors heard the N word constantly. And now I hear the N word constantly, or I use it. Well, I'm going to argue that there's going to be potentially some transference of experience. So if I wanted to keep a people down, I'm telling you now, if I was a psychopath, based on the evidence, one thing I would do is I would find the words historically that those people ethnically as a genetic group find negative. I would find things that they dislike, and then I would use those things. Mussolini would often, on the plenum and the stage, stand like this with his shoulders up and his fists on the plenum when he would talk like this. He would talk like this if you look at pictures with his fists on the plenum. And the reason why he would do this is because he believed that subconsciously he could scare Africans by looking like a gorilla because they're scared of male gorillas. And he wanted to look like an alpha male. So that's a fact. That's not an opinion, by the way. So that's one way of looking at how the elites, El is the Hebrew term for God, Elohim is the plural term. These elites, people that are Els, and then Gurmukhi El, Iri Lalla adds up 3 plus 3, 3, it equals 36. Just to let you know. It's my,
Elite.
it's
And
just Elites.
elites.
It's
Elite.
Israelites. Notice the term Israelites. Israel. El is the Hebrew term for God.
Wow. So this
And it,
element of control, but also liberation through language, and we've shown that through Gurbani. Before we move on to the Western world and how would
one quick thing, Paisa, can I
yeah.
just finish off and say that if we take Ik as 9, Irikaka, and Ongar, one formless creator, yeah? And Ongar is said to be the sound form. If you look into it, that gave rise to the universe. Well, 432, the sun, the earth, 396, and the moon, 108. Guess what they add up to? 936.
6.
Mind blowing. You know, when these things started happening and they started arising, because I knew I wasn't generating it, I can't say to you how it felt. It felt very bizarre. At first, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep quiet about this. Because Simran isn't where we sit there and start thinking and marveling at whatever, is happening in our mind. Simran is actually a turning away that only happens when our heart is very in love with Guru Sahib, but then naturally Simran happens. It's not an effort, a jap by jap. Maharaj himself says the chanting without the chant. And notice that jap backwards is bunge without the nasal sound in it. So, as in, like, if you wrote jup or bunge, they'd have the same letters in reverse because, of course, it'd just be a nasalization. They literally have the same letters and equal the same thing. So, what I began to realize was that it seems that Guru Sahib wishes to prove that they're the perfect teacher of this age. And the way that, in my opinion, Guru Sahib is doing it is that Guru Sahib has essentially Guru Sahib does one thing and Guru Sahib does millions of things. So don't think of what I'm saying is like, let me say straight away, I can't speak on behalf of Guru Sahib. I should say that straight away. And I'm not trying to speak on behalf of Guru Sahib, but what I'm saying is it seems to me that something Guru Sahib has done is that Guru Sahib has encoded something very deep that allows us to unlock certain aspects of the Semitic tradition. I'll give you one more example. The first verse that the angel Jibriel, often called Gabriel, Jibriel is the Arabic name, Gavriel is actually the Hebrew name. The first verse that was revealed wasn't the first verse chronologically in the Quran. It was actually the 96th verse. Now, Guru Nanak equals 96 in Gurmukhi Gematria. And it was actually 5 lines, number 5 again. Only 5 lines were given. And they end basically with the angel Gabriel saying, but humans are arrogant, in the face of God who teaches man by the pen, likia, ik, which encodes ik, that which he didn't know before. And 5 lines. Now, Sangatji, what isn't written in the Quran is something which all Muslims accept. That before revealing those 5 lines, what this angel did to Muhammad, who's apparently 40 years old, and he had spent 40 days on Jabal al-Nur, which means a mountain of light. Notice how Nur encodes Ru backwards, which is also light. Nurah means light in Arabic. 40 years old, 40 days. Well, the term guru equals 40, just to let you know. And going away for 40 days is a tradition within the Indic tradition and the Semitic tradition in terms of spiritual transformation. Conversation for another day. But what I want you to know is that actually all Muslims agree that this being said 3 words. It seems that Muhammad was in some form of meditation in darkness. So he was in the gu. And then this ru, this light appears, right? And what we're told is that this being goes behind him and clamps his chest. Now, I would say the only reason you would do that is because you're trying to get someone to breathe. They may have stopped talking, they may have stopped breathing, maybe done some form of meditation. I don't know. It seems to insinuate that. And then this being says this, Ikra, Ikra, Ikra. Those are the first 3 words, the first 3 teachings of the Islamic tradition. They don't say that, but I that for me is a fact. Now, somebody, yeah, you'd agree that the term Ikra sounds a lot like a compressed form of Ikwankar. In Genesis, the term Yikra also appears. In fact, in the Iranian, or you could say a Western or Babylonian, because it's all the same, Persian, Farsi, it's the same area, Iraq stroke Iran. Yek, combining the term yik or yikra and ek and ik. It's all in the Hebrew. Ik is echad, sounds like ek, right? If you ignore the Mihari, then Sehari, sorry, you can see that Edi and Kakka look like ek. And it doesn't just say ik, then it says ek. So, I've probably gone off my original point, but I guess what I was trying to say is that one of the things I believe, Sangaji, as mind-blowing as this may sound, is that particular soul is accepted by Muslims, Christians, and Jews as essentially the chosen one when it comes to projecting the teachings of the formless creator. Now, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji went missing for 3 days in a river. Now, water historically is associated with the angelic realm. Now, that's 3 days of 24 hours. That gives us 324. Well, Sangatji, on the Pentagon, when you lay out these elements, water, which I call hydroxygenesis, water is the dumbing down of that. Water is 108, 108, 108. Now, that equals 324. Also, when you look at 3 times 24, in other words, how many hours are there in 3 days? That's 72 hours. So, which is a Hebrew number for God. The idea of 36, 72 emerges. This idea of Guru Nanak being something beyond this realm, emerging into duality, perhaps. Nanak as well sounded backwards, not my opinion, literally phonetically. Nanak backwards gives us Canaan. Canaan is the oldest word that I have found that refers to these lands, because before they were called Judea, they were called Canaan.
Wow.
So that's not the only reason. I'm going to be releasing a tract called the Divinity of Shri Guru Nanak. And one of the arguments I'll be making is that based on certain evidence, whether it's geometry or etymology, or the numbering system. I believe. I'm also trying to prove that there's two great souls. One gives the teachings, and one defends the innocence and brings justice. Mikael, yeah. Um, so I actually literally the problem for the Sangat is that they've grown up on these images of someone with feathery wings and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to explain is that there is only one formless creator. They don't just appear at one time. They don't appear to speak in one language. Gurbani famously, dozens of languages literally are in Gurbani. Another sign that maybe the being that started this off is beyond language. Anyone? So and there's other clues for me. The way Guru Nanak Sahib Ji talks, the vocabulary they use. There's lots of reasons I believe this. If you look at the Ga Avriel, the two sound forms that give us the two syllabic aspects are Ga and Va. Now in the Hebrew tradition, Ga is a third term and Va is the sixth term, 3-6. There's lots of reasons. The 108th line of Jap is Gerbal Gerb hai. 108th that Guru Gobind Singh Ji says that Vaheguru is the Gerb of the Gerbal. Now here Gerb means a shawl that spiritual people put over their head. One of the reasons this is that it's also the gabe in a roof. This idea of a mantle in a house, the gabe of a roof. Now I talk about angles and ik. I'm essentially talking about the idea of reality coming out of the formless. Angles doesn't just sound like angels for no reason. The term ang means limb, el means God, angel. So notice that the term ang, if you notice, has a nasalization. It doesn't actually have a character nunna in the middle. So if you then say ug, now what does ug sound like?
Fire.
Right. So whether it's the water or the watery realm of angels exposing on earth as fiery angels and all this, we're actually getting into very deep. We've literally just actually essentially united the Indic and Semitic tradition and said that, well, these are the limbs of God. What a
Wow.
beautiful way to describe these beings as limbs of the formless, you know. And note that the word angel and angle aren't similar for no reason, that the ancients understood that when they're drawing geometry, note that when people do magic rituals, they use geometry, whether it's Aleister Crowley or the others, they all use all these, they call them sigils. You know? That when you're looking at reality taking place, essentially, aside from describing it very subjectively with words, you can actually get very objective and you can use numbers and you can use geometry. Geometry is numbers taking form.
Mm.
You know?
And
You can even describe music. Notice that music encodes muse, that which inspires, and ik, the oneness. Notice that music is essentially geometry as vibration. Think of reality as geometry as solidity. And what I'm not saying is that Sangatji, take a dodecahedron, look at it, and you'll merge with Nam. I'm not saying that. Maharaj has given us vibrational technology for a reason when it comes to Nam. But what I'm saying is that there's a whole new modality that we should look at, whereby Guru Sahib is giving us very deep understandings. Now, if you're an atheist, or you're someone who's not going to be inspired by going to a Kirtan program where you can't understand everything, sadly, they don't have that blessed destiny just yet. And sadly, those that do throw it away, I've seen as well, sadly, amongst Punjabis. They may come to Sikhi through different places. In other words, they may not come through to Sikhi through the bhakti, devotional singing. It may be Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's cared, and I believe it is, that some of these people will come to Sikhi through the absolute magnanimity, the absolute genius, the absolute perfection that is Guru Sahib. And that will happen through geometry, music. So here we could talk about the fact that there are 60 musical measures.
wow, and mathematics, because before we just go into music, I was thinking that like the buddhi, like using your intellect, is also a form of devotion, because there's great mathematicians who can also get lost in the devotion,
Right.
like Fibonacci of the world. And I feel like a lot of people who have a tendency to be intellectual might not they could be devotional. Like I'm an engineer, but I also love kirtan. But there could be some people who have a tendency to have more devotion in their intellect, and that would form a sort of like
Hanji,
practice, like devotional practice, which is
Hanji,
the intellect,
Hanji,
right? And I
Hanji.
was I was wondering if we could, before we go into the music, if you could talk into why do you think it is um, understanding this deeper level to unlock this deeper mysticism of the Semitic traditions, and also if people are experiencing this intuitive understanding when they're doing Simran, what guidance can you give them in terms of, because they might have some insights, but they might also um, like not really recognize it. So, like, is there anything you could also just let them know, like, about your journey and how that started occurring as well?
Hanji, I'm 46 now. I turned 46 not so long ago. It was
Mm.
at the age of 40 um, uh, that, yeah, I'd say around 6 years ago, funnily enough. 6 years ago, as of around 2, 3 weeks ago, that I started sort of, you could say, intimations. I ignored them. Since Maharaj blessed me with Amrit, to be without Mrit and death. And, Simran's been for me to ignore my thoughts, you know, to essentially, die to my own thoughts within my heart. So I was astounded when certain things wouldn't leave my mind. I was like, I'm not really interested in this. Why does it keep being persistent? And then I kind of felt that Maharaj was kind of like pushing me a little bit. Huh? And then I started giving more attention to it. Then I
Mm.
started thinking, Maharaj, this is unbelievable. So just to give you one example, Hannah, the number 36, if you draw it this way round or that way round, it appears the same. So it suggests creational dynamics before there was even direction.
Wow.
So Sangaji can practice that if they want. The other thing is when you draw the 3, you end up with a little 9 at the end on the tail. You do this, and then you do a little 9 at the
Oh
end,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
little tail. Now, when you do the 6, which is called shear, and shiva, to destroy, and shear, just one letter, which equals 12, and 12 times 6 is 72, and it's a doubling of 6. There's many clues Maharaj gives us in the way they name these numbers. Um, and shear suggests shun, and somehow nam coming out of that ikar at the beginning, right? Um, when we I couldn't remember what my original point was, but I said that happens to me often because I often will go off on 3 points to prove the original point. Uh,
Um,
we were talking about Ishir because I was talking about the Semitic tradition, and
36 came into your mind when you
thank
first, yeah.
you, thank you, Shah.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Now 36 is called a Shatti. Now, would you agree that the term Shatti has the word Shat in there?
Mm-hmm.
And Shatta means roof. Now, I just spoke about how Gabe means roof. Gabriel. Right. Now, the crazy thing is that Shatta doesn't just mean something in the Indic tradition, roof. In the Hebrew tradition, Shatta means foundation.
Ah.
So Maharaj is the foundation, Maharaj is the house, Maharaj is the roof, as far as I'm concerned, right? So these terms, they're not just by coincidence. You know? We could talk a lot about this, but I won't go too much into that. But what I'd say is that in terms of being inspired, what I'm really saying is that Sangatji, look, if you want to be inspired by Guru Sahib, you have to understand that Gurbani tells you that anyone who tries to find the truth externally only encounters pain. I'm literally paraphrasing Guru Sahib here. And that only that person who goes internally, only they will experience the bliss of uniting with Vaheguru, the aesthetic experience of experiencing Amrit within. In other words, the soul recognizing itself, and then the soul being wondrously inspired by itself, but knowing that itself is actually Vaheguru ultimately, the Atma. Now, how does this relate to learning, right? Because that's what we are. We're Sikh. Maharaj could use many words, but Maharaj used Sikh. Well, the clue is in the middle, ik. Now, what we have to understand is that it's only through one thing, japota eko nama, avar nirafal kama, that aside from meditating upon the name of the one nama, all of our works will give nirafal. They're fruitless. Phala means fruit. And a nirafal kama, works. Kama means desires. Notice how it also refers to sexual energy. And notice also how calm equals 36, 6 plus 30. These things aren't by chance. That Maharaj is giving us insights into creational dynamics, is what Maharaj is doing, in my opinion. Now, how can Sangha look at, whether it's a Semitic tradition, whether it's the Zoroastrian tradition, whatever it is, and notice that the word jor, or if you pronounce it as zor, appears in Gurbani. Some people pronounce it as jor. Notice that what I'm trying to say is that Maharaj put lots of breadcrumbs all over the place. When you begin to experience Maharaj as Shabad, as vibration. So when we're listening to Maharaj like that, we're much more likely, you could say we're much more conducive to experiencing Gurbani beyond our understandings. It's traditional for us to sit there and think, I'm going to work out Gurbani, I'm going to work out the meanings, all the rest of it. Someone once asked, Payo Rana Tir, Rana heart, Tir, arrow that pierces a heart. Notice that Gurbani doesn't just mean the words of the Guru. Ban means arrows, the arrows of the Guru, which actually relates to the same meaning of the Torah. The Torah also refers to the idea of arrows and weapons, believe it or not. Conversation for another day. Thank you, Paisab. But those who are destined to receive the teachings of the perfect teacher of this age, because Gurbani makes clear, whether people like it or not, that for every single age there is a teacher, and in Kali Yuga, that this is now the completion of the cycle of time. So I'm paraphrasing Gurbani there. And Gupta Nam Pargaja, which means that the secret name has become manifest. We have to place importance upon the Guru Mantra, Vahe Guru. So what I'm saying is, if someone really wants to search Guru Sahib, number one, Pritam Rahet, they have to accept Amrit. There's no going around that. There is no going around that. There's no, yes, if you have genuine love for Gurbani, don't get me wrong, you'll be inspired. In fact, you'll be inspired by you'll be inspired more than some so-called Pakhandi Amritari, because some people just take Amrit and they don't really care. Do you understand what I'm saying? So don't think I'm limiting Maharaj's care. That's not what I'm doing. But what I'm saying is, if someone begins to get intimations that Guru Sahib is everything, they have to take Amrit, because that is an actual, energetic, happening. Now, when they become a Gursik, what happens is that they start trying to essentially merge with Gurbani, Milap. Milap means merger, but Mil means to meet, and Ap means yourself. So what they're trying to do is that they're trying to find Vaheguru within through Gurbani. They recognize that I can't look externally, yet Gurbani is that. Vaho Vaho Bani Nirinkar hai tis Jevarav na koi. So Maharaj is clearly telling us that one whom acts without acting, Nirankar, that one is also this Bani, that one is also this, and through this vibration, just like those Brahm Bhagats, they became one with this vibration through Guruji's Kirpa directly. We too can become Gurmukhs, as in Guru facing. Now, Gurmukh is a term that is used not just to describe the Gursikhs as Gurmukh. Believe it or not, Gurmukh is referred to as Guru Sahib in some places. Even Vaheguru is called Gurmukh in some places in Gurbani. And Gurmukh means to be Guru facing. So there's this idea of the ultimate triangle being inward facing, because it's all just one. Maharaj even says this universe happens because one Vaheguru decides to create, two Vaheguru creates the otherness, separateness, and then three, the Guru is numbered as three. Then there is a need for the Guru. Mind-blowing. So if those people, let's just say that someone hasn't been given Guru Mantar, Guru Man Antar, Guru the enlightener, from darkness to light, what needs to happen? The Man, the soul, the mind. Man means both things. Nam backwards, same letters. And Antar, to go inside. So the Guru, the enlightener, through the mind and soul, 36, soul, third chakra, mind, sixth chakra, because we're not going to be manmukhs and go back into zero in the void of the 6-3, be manmukhs, have a soul led by the mind, go into the cycle of rebirth and death, right? Wow, that is beautiful. Note that the term Sifar is where the term cipher came from. Cipher refers to that which means more than it inherently may do. Just physically. A cipher is for instance, is a name that you go by that might not be known to everyone. You see, Maharaj's care is beautiful. So What I'm saying is that those who haven't been blessed to fall at the feet of Guru Nanak through the Amrit of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, one and the same, then they should use Mool Mantar. Now, if they keep repeating Mool Mantar and they get to the stage, and if they're very blessed, it begins very quickly with devotion, with love, then what's going to happen is the way that they learn is going to change. Those who are blessed with Vaheguru Guru Mantar, for those people, there is even more in store because that technology, Vaheguru, as a sound form, the way that can be embodied by the body is fascinating. But what I'll do is I'll make one more point by relating Vahe to the Semitic tradition, and then we'll move on to, well, in terms of normal day life and learning, well, what does this actually look like?
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on Jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to Jhoty.com. All the links are in the description, and connect with like-minded people where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast.
Okay. Firstly, note that Yehovah, the Hebrew name for God, is so holy to them that they don't even want to say that word. They'll say Hashem, which means the name. Yehovah is sounds a bit like Vaheh, doesn't it? Coming out from the middle. Yehovah, Vaheh.
Yeah, wow.
And in the Hebrew tradition, He is 5, it's the 5th letter. And Vav is a 6th letter, they're consecutive, 5, 6. Now, Nanak equals 5, 6, 56. Nanak, Nana 25, Nana 25, Kaka 6, 56. But also, I've shown, like, constantly how all of the mathematics, time-space dynamics are based upon the idea of the pentagon, 5-ness. You can also describe as a dodecahedron, and 6-ness, the hexagon, which doesn't self-same 3D construct perfectly touch the inside of a sphere, because 6-ness, I'm arguing, is an implication of the formless, the first and fifth divine. And just very quickly, very like when I say this 5, 6, and people think, well, okay, he's just pulled that out of nowhere. Well, how does this go deep? Well, people are going to all accept that water and DNA are very important in terms of life. I mean, people would be silly not to accept that, right? For reasons I don't need to even go into. Now, DNA, when you break it down, it's made up of just 5 different things. I won't even go into it, just look into it, 5 different types of things. Okay, that's interesting. The other thing is that it's only constructed in terms of the molecules attached as pentagons and hexagons, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6. As if Nanak is the word for life, like mathematically, right? And the other thing is that when you look at the way the spiral, because everything is spiraling like the sun, whether it's our blood cells, whether it's the sun, whether it's the DNA, conversation for another day, the way that spiral is constructed, you can literally stack dodecahedrons and they're aligned to the line of that spiral. In other words, it's spiraling according to 108 dynamics or dodecahedral dynamics. Okay, so that's how DNA essentially not only encodes Nanak because it's just a series of 5s and 6s, but also these dynamics of 108. Now let's go to water. Everyone will accept science essentially says without water there is no life. Okay, Bani. Now, Bar means to instill. Okay, An means honor. Okay, now what I want to say is, remember that only by taking Amrit we can begin to take on An. We spoke about Gyan, didn't we, Hannah? And notice that Nam backwards is Man, which also means honor. Hannah? Only way we can achieve honor. It carries on. Like, I have to try to stop myself because then Sangatji will feel Sa, breath, Ang. limbs, at, extent of. So we transcend the extent of breath, first lower resonant element that comes out of Nam, expansive, contractive universe, by attaching to the Sangha to give us the extent beyond Sa, you could argue, huh? Sarova. What is water going to do with breath? But anyway, you get the idea. So just going back to that, what I'm saying is that when you take water, so for instance, water, I'm going to call water liquid, I'm going to call water vapor gas, I'm going to call ice solid. So we have the triplicate. Can't get away from that threeness, can we? That triplicate of solid gas and solid liquid gas. Now, water as a solid is around 110, 111. Solid water as in the way that the hydrogen, the angle is attached to the O. Yeah. Now remember that hydrogen is 1 and oxygen is 8 on the periodic table.
1 8.
Yeah. Yeah. 1 to 8 equals 36. And hydrogen, its atomic weight is 1.008. Fascinating. Now, when you look at these three, so what is often called a dihedral angle, a dipole moment when magnetism is acting and there's an angle. With water, it's around 104. With ice, it's around 111. With a vapor, it's around 107 or something. But when you take the mean average of those three, it's 108 degrees to less than a fraction of a degree. So that, again, in itself is quite mind-blowing, especially when you realize that Nam, Bon, and then Bani, third element, if we take it that way from Nam, this sense of threeness, 3 days by the water. It doesn't end, so let's say that you're someone who is inspired by Guru Sahib and you're trying to learn. Well, what I would say is that you're a Sikh of the Guru. And the Guru is this universe manifesting. This universe is essentially manifesting. And the term man isn't just there at the beginning of man, manifesting for no reason, to extract profit. And profit isn't just something you benefit, which is Nam here. Maharaj literally says at the end of Japji, only mint the coin of Nam. All else money is useless. All Maya is useless. But you're here because it's only on planet Earth that the lower resonant realm that we're able to return back to Nam. And so the earth element is the last one before you get back into Nam. Now, that's why we're on planet Earth, to learn. And like I showed, the radius of planet Earth is encoding these dynamics. It's encoding Guru Nanak Sahib's year of birth and mortal ascendance 3960. So we're understanding that, well, okay, well, we have to learn about the planet, we have to learn about how things work, but how can I do it in a way where I'm not distracted, from my Simran, or I'm not going into Manmat, because Gurbani doesn't, in some places, Gurbani says, for instance, Gurbani says, give me a person, give me like a room, give me millions and millions of books, let's give them to that person. And you're shaking your head because you've heard that shabd and it's probably coming back to you, millions of books essentially, and let that person read those books. Let that person read those books until their last breath. Breath is the first low resonant element. They call it, Maharaj calls it Baon. Now, Baon, it goes on, and Ba means to instill. And Papa is the only Gurmukhi letter that is exactly the same as a number, the number 5. And it looks like a receptacle, like a cup you pour things in. Maharaj elsewhere says, Jalubina Kumbana, that, and then Maharaj carries on by saying that without the pitcher, there can be no water poured in. Without water, the pitcher cannot be created. And Punj looks like a receptacle. In the ancient tradition, whenever they drew that on the walls, they'd often say that this is a cup or it's a vessel. That's what it would signify. So Maharaj says that all I'll show you at the end, after all those years, all those books, all those breaths, is someone who is at odds with their own home. Home sounds like oh, doesn't it? Fire. I argue that's element fire. I argue that is actually fire. One of the reasons why Brahmins and even the Hebrew tradition, it finds itself in words such as shalom, peace. It's one of the reasons why, whether it's Zoroastrians or Brahmins or Orthodox Jews, original or like, and I'm going to argue it's not the only name, So the idea of spring, even the new year in the beginning, Basant is related to the idea of fire, believe it or not, the fire of the sun now, the springtime. And then we can get into the phases of the sun here, but we won't. So going back to how Maharaj is trying to inspire us, the direction. The direction has to come from Nam. The direction has to come from Maharaj. Now look at Maharaj. Maharaj essentially said to a whole group of people, here, take your Qurbans off. Not my opinion, historical fact. You're now going to be Nirmale. Nirmal, Nirmal. I would say that Maharaj saying without form, without the form of the Khalsa. But are we going to say these weren't Gurmukhs? So, an idiot is the person who says these weren't Gurmukhs. An idiot is a person who also even says that these weren't really Uche Avaste. Guru Sahib does what they want. Guru Sahib does what they want. It's our problem whether we understand it or not, or we get it twisted. Now, this is an argument whether we're talking about Charitra or Pakyan, where some people think it's some kind of pornographic material, because I'm going to say, frankly, they don't understand energy. This is their own modern Western projections. Are they going to say that Guru Sahib is like Sigmund Freud, because Guru Gobind Singh Ji said that in Kali Yuga? Forgive me, I'm trying to just make a point. Please don't think I'm being disrespectful, because Maharaj said that in Kali Yuga, father will sleep with daughter, in Kali Yuga, mother will sleep with son. No, I'm going to say, because Guru Sahib is the antidote of Kali Yuga. Guru Sahib is telling us what kind of society is being created. Whether we want to go into a conversation about how Freudianism has essentially led to a massive amount of, it's been massively influential on advertising in particular. In fact, Edward Bernays, who essentially wrote the Bible on advertising, was actually a relative of Sigmund Freud. And his great-grandson or someone else is actually the Netflix CEO at the moment. These families know what they're doing when it comes to so-called occult knowledge,
And we'll get into that hopefully after the Gurbani, talking about Gurbani, because I also recently watched the CIA documentary that during the World War II that they actually looked at creating inappropriate images to demoralize, for example, the German forces and things like that. But before we delve into like the etymology of Rome and everything, I'd love to just stay with Gurbani a bit more with that vibe.
If you only care,
Yeah.
if you only care about Guru Sahib,
Yes.
then Guru Sahib will teach you what else you need to know in a very, very mystical manner. By the way, the term mist is a Semitic term, means husband. In a very mystical manner, in that you'll be pulled towards things. We all know when we're desiring something or we're not desiring something, and that's a litmus test. And ultimately, that can only come from someone who is either at the very minimum concentrating on breath. So Buddhist practice is often just concentrating on breath. Very good, by the way. Nam is the final. Whether people realize this or not, Nam is the final. Nam is breath returning. Breath is itself a duality. Nam is when breath, that contractive expansive, whether it's a universe as contractive expansive breath, whether it's your lungs as contractive expansive breath, when that breath returns to Nam, that's essentially enlightenment. So what I'm saying is that learning, and notice how learning has the word earn, gamai, gamai, to make efforts, because calm doesn't just mean lust. Notice how calm is always mentioned at the beginning. Calm, krodh, lobh, moh, ahankar. Always calm at the beginning. Calm, which equals 36. Gematria. Calm also means desires. The whole reason why this universe exists is because of, in that sense, the meaning calm, because Vaheguru desired it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. It would hukam, hu, to be, kam, desires.
Come to do work or to.
So if we take the ancient Hebrew term hukam became Arabi hukam and finds its way in Gurbani. Hukam or razai chalana, nanak, le ikya. Notice how the word le ik, nal. Ahmad had started there likya with ik as well. So in terms of learning, we have to be focusing on Gurbani at the very minimum, and Guru Nam, Guru Mantar, Gurmat Nam. Gurmat Naam, as in that Naam that Vaheguru chose. We don't get to choose. Guru Sahib, as proved by Bhai Gurdas Ji. This actually came up recently because I think Nanak Naam, the charity, had a bit of controversy because the speaker, who otherwise, I've seen some of his videos, they're amazing. They're really nice, by the way. I should say that. But in this particular video, I think Baji maybe could have worded what he was trying to say better. And he ended up coming off as saying, well, it doesn't matter what Bhai Gurdas Ji is saying in his 40th verse, by the way. 40 equals Guru. And it's in that verse he chooses to say Vaheguru is like the Guru Mantra essentially. Interesting. 32 equals 40. But what he ended up kind of saying was, without properly intending it, is that Vaheguru isn't really significant in comparison to anything else. Now that is absolutely, totally in the face of not just, I would argue, Gurbani, because the word Vaheguru does appear in Gurbani, as well as derivatives such as Gurva, Gurva, Gurva. But also because when you look at Barat and Retaname, when you look at Hukaname, when you look at historical texts, it's unanimous. Vaheguru Guru Mantra has been singled out. So Baji, I would say, has to be very careful. If he's going to call his charity Nanak Naam, well, he's kind of doing the one thing his charity is supposed to be. He's not doing, he's doing the opposite. He's defying the purpose of Nanak Naam. Nanak Naam, well, we know the Naam that Nanak gave us. So if a person is meditating on Gurbani, listening to Kirtan, and they're sincere, not just like, like a hack, they're sincere, as in sincerity means love. Now, 3 chakras above, 3 chakras below. The heart is the temple along the 33 vertebrae that have 3 chakras above and 3 chakras below. And a Nijikar, Maharaj calls a heart Nijikar. Hirda and Hira, diamond. Naam is described as a diamond. The heart is described as a diamond. So only Naam compares to the heart, and the soul is pulled up. These are all energetic things that essentially happen when someone isn't in the lower chakras of shit, piss, sex, sleep, and they, and they come up above those 2 chakras, and eventually their soul, when they begin to either decide that I'm going to use my sense of self, my creativity, my separateness, to do something in the world, they might become a poet, they might become an artist, they might become a singer, but only when their energy. Maharaj says in Gurbani that the soul resides in the belly. So don't think that I'm trying to innovate here and make stuff up. But essentially what's happening when we sing with the 5th chakra, 5th, this is the power of Gurbani, Panch. When we sing the 5th chakra, when we sing with the 5th chakra, essentially love forms in the heart. Right? And essentially we were pulling our soul up via our heart. And so through the throat, the heart, and the soul is pulled up, it transcends the mind. Transcends the mind. And it's not a coincidence that Maharaj has changed the number 7 from what is Devanagari, because that's the script used. Because remember, Sanskrit was written in different scripts, for instance, Brahmi. But Devanagari, Sanskrit number 7 is a snake coiled up, and indeed is called a sapata, which sounds like sap, right? However, Maharaj changed the name and called it Sat and uncurled the snake. And it looks like a 7, looks like the Indo-Arabic 7. So Maharaj has uncurled the snake. So essentially you could say that, and similar to how a pharaoh has that. Maharaj, and indeed, when Maharaj was asleep and the sun had moved, because that's what happens, a tree shade moved, a cobra turned up, a sup, and did that above Maharaj's head. And in the Indic tradition or the North African tradition, that just basically means one thing. It means that's an enlightened soul. In other words, a lower resonant electrical energy, the astral body, that has essentially Ida Pingala, that has now returned via Shushmana, the central spine, coming out of the Shushmana, the soul, the mind coming out of the void, that has reunited. This is even found in the Semitic tradition, but unfortunately they can't read their scriptures because they're so far gone. Hanji.
I was just going to wonder, because when you were talking about like an Indic tradition, Guru Nanak or Shiva with the snake, also the pharaohs, when I was in the museum in London, I noticed the pharaohs also had like a snake and with their helmet. Is that like related to in the same way?
Yes, one of the things people don't realize is that the Indic tradition and the North African, pharaoh tradition, they did influence each other, even if it's not written about massively. And this can be proven in that there are letters that have been found in Amarna. On the map, it might be called Tel El Amarna now. from Pharaoh Akhenaten, which means the one who proclaims the sun, Aten. Notice how Aten sounds like atom, an atom, an Adam, right?
Wow.
Interesting. Letters that he and his father had written, and they've existed because they're on their own tablet. Huh? And one of the reasons why I think they did that wasn't because they were dumb, because they had papyrus. It's because they wanted to preserve these things. They wanted them to be hard to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyway, and those letters are from his father. I think some from him, definitely from his father. Don't quote me from him. And they're in the Franca lingua. Franca lingua means common language. Note that the Italian Latin term for language, lingua, encodes the term lingua, lingam, which is the Sanskrit for penis, because they realize that you inseminate the lower resonant realm, the female aspect, Shakti, with Shiv, the male element. They realize this. You begin to realize this from the sound forms
Metaphysics.
harnessed. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It gets into metaphysics at this point from phonetics. Phonetics most likely from Phoenicians. And notice how phos, phot, pho in many ways is associated with light. So the term for light, phonetic, photon, the term for sound, phonetics are related. And that's because I believe the ancients totally knew that sound and light are absolutely related. And a sound is essentially just a lower form of light, which itself is something part of the formless, which we can talk about, but we can never reach by talking. Myself, you'll just have to pull me back to.
I think we were just talking about Egypt, the pharaohs, and why they had this
The pharaohs.
this
So they were
headpiece.
communicating.
Okay.
So sorry, Faisal Hanji. So we know they were communicating. They were 100% communicating. Now, if they're communicating because the Indus Valley was a large element of it, at least, was a vassal state to Kemet. Kemet is where the term chemistry came from, by the way. And Chem means darkness. I believe they're
Yes.
referring to the cosmos.
Alchemy. Alchemy.
Anji, thank you.
Mm.
The term alchemy and chemistry come from chem. Chem means darkness. It means blackness. So they understood that everything is coming from the blackness of the cosmos. It's fascinating, by the way, as an aside, that originally some of the oldest paintings of Shiva and Krishna are of black-skinned people, not blue-skinned. But there seems to have been a lightening of the skin in a similar way of the Europeanization of someone who's called Shidi Ishor. The Aramaic original name is either Ishor or Esau, can't be anything else. And similarly to Indic prophets, gods, whatever you want to call them, this whitening at the hands of the Brahmins there, but on the other side at the hands of European church, there's similarities. So going back to the Pharaoh, so yeah, we know there was communication. And the other thing is that there's a massive amount of knowledge that seems to be hidden around similar understandings. So to give you one example, you have a massive amount of knowledge and focus in the North African tradition around the sun. That's anyone wants to Google that, they'll find a massive amount of religious traditions, and that happened throughout thousands of years. By the way, Akhenaten sending letters to the Indus Valley was going to be around maybe 5,000 to 6,000 years ago max, long time ago. You're talking about the time before even Moses was kind of walking around. There's a massive emphasis on the sun. Whether it's a Surya in the Indic tradition. Notice we were talking about Sur earlier, and the chariot and the horses and number symbolism, or in the North African tradition. So you have the idea of the falcon being associated with the sun. Notice how Guru Gobind Singh Ji was called Baj, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the sixth Guru, is also Baz Halana, which is interesting. You had this association. Now, one of the reasons is this hasn't been written about by anyone. I don't think they've written about this, but to me, one of the reasons is obvious. I've been fascinated with falcons my whole life. I mean, that's a separate conversation. But one thing you'll note when falcons hunt is they're extremely clever. And let's just say that most of them stoop. They don't all stoop as part of their hunting method, not all of them, strictly speaking, because there's not just one falcon. But if we take the peregrine falcon, which similar to the Lanner falcon and one or two other falcons would definitely be the only one for reasons I won't go into. They're the only ones that could be the one that is constantly used in North Africa. And notice that the study of birds is called ornithology, i.e. these beings that come out from the light, what a falcon does. And a fal is Greek for fruit, but fal is Greek for penis, phallus, but in the Indic tradition it means fruit, fal. right? So fruit of the loins. These are deeper conversations, but you're going to see how the European linguistic tradition took very deep metaphysical concepts,
From
yeah,
Indic.
from Indic sound forms in many ways. So if you take, for instance, the term tax, well, taksal, which is in the last verse of Japji,
Taxila.
Hanji, thank you. That is an Indic term, and it's a place where you mint coins.
Mm.
So there's a clue that they're just making money out of us. All the terms they take. And the term money itself is clearly from the term Juno moneta. Now, June is a 6th month, and we won't go into sixness in the Latin tradition right now. The term for six in Latin is sex. Yes. This, when you learn about different areas, especially biology and the occult
Mm-hmm.
and sex and even Tantra,
Mm-hmm.
Mantra, how to get the mind across, Tantra, how to get the body across. Tantra is a very
Mm.
low practice. Just by taking its own words without me saying anything, Hannah,
Wow.
it's low. Hannah. So what was I going to say? Sorry,
So
Brian.
I think guess before we go into the European understanding of like taking the Indic
European.
etymology and then changing, yeah, before we go into that, I I think we've maybe finished with the pharaohs in Egypt. If we could,
They
um,
sorry. What I was going to say, by
yeah,
some was that there's understandings that can be indirectly taken from them when we realize, well, okay, they had this snake symbology,
yes,
they had these various different idols, god of the sun, god of this, that, to the point where people even say, well, this particular god, Vishnu, is probably Shu, the primal creator of the, and they try to do similarities,
mm-hmm.
right? Um, but one thing that's really mesmerizing is the fact that when the pharaohs would be mummified, right,
Mm-hmm.
what they would do is that they would actually treat the physical body with less respect. So we're used to these bandages, aren't we, and the wooden casket, all ornamental. But what people aren't focusing on, and I actually believe this is because the elites don't want us to think
It's the
about it more,
brain.
is the organs. Thank you. And that's one of
It's
them.
okay through the
Yeah.
nose. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hemisphere. Hem refers to multiple gods in the Hebrew tradition. But what I'm going to do is think of hemoglobin in our blood.
Yes.
I'm not going to go too much down there because what I'll do is I'll end up having to do individual explanations because some of the G will probably get lost in the source. Not physical source, the formless source.
Nice
Ta-da!
one.
So, um,
Hmm.
the what they or is a Hebrew term for light. Your skin is an organ, your brain is an organ, and what they did was they took out the organs, including the heart, including the throat, the brain. They took out the organs, and them they didn't just leave there in that little wooden casket with the bandages, all the rest of it. They put these in proper
Jar.
ornamental art jars. Thank you. They
Mhm.
jarred them up. You've probably read about this in the most expensive materials. Now, I'm going to argue it's because they knew that the seven chakras are related to actual physical organs. I'm not saying they're limited. I'm going to say there's one that's above physical organs, though. Most people, it's become especially fashionable amongst the people such as Joe Soap Dispenser. I call him soap dispenser. Conversation for another day. Um, and other people, even Robert Edward Grant and other people whose writings to some extent I respect. But unfortunately, these people don't meditate on Nam. I'm just going to say it straight. If they did, they'd realize that actually the seventh chakra is beyond. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why they would show like a sun, a halo.
Mm.
Hali in the Semitic tradition refers to light. Heli, Hali, hollow, Greek, they all come from that. Hel, even light because of all the fire, right? Hydrogen, high means light. Helium, heli means light. All these terms were used for the periodic. Bir means Hebrew, means fire. Pyramid, mountain of fire, you know. One of the reasons I believe that is because it encodes solar mathematics, but that's a conversation for another
Yeah,
time.
and I think South Americans also had that, but yeah.
So if we look at the chakras and think, okay, is it the case that for the soul chakras, some of them I think are special. The soul I think is special, and the crown. And for me, the only aspect that looks geometrically like what could be referred to is because there are 10 abdominal separations. I'm going to stress that you can separate biologically differently according to how you do it. But one way of separating the abdominals, ab means beginning, aleph, bet, A, B. Ab means to begin. So Abat means father, for instance. It's the first two letters. Abuna means father here. These things have found their way into Ab means river, water. You could argue is the source of a civilization. Punjab, the word Ab is in Ab, right? So
Yes.
these things aren't just with the Semitic tradition, right? Um, so um, so with other ones like for instance, the throat chakra. So I'm going to argue that the throat chakra can essentially be referred to as the throat box. That the heart chakra can be referred to as the heart. To give you one example, the ancients described the heart chakra as having 12 petals. Now, when you look at the heart, the way blood flows in and out, there's a 12-step process. That's not my opinion. You can Google that. You can Google 12-step process heart. Yeah. So whether it's a clock of time and space, the zodiacal clock, the clock face, or it's our heart. And Maharaj says that the breath is essentially your clock. Huh? Not the linear, illusory procession of time, which I talk a lot about, by the way. But Maharaj says that you have a certain amount of breaths.
Yes.
So we have to
Swas.
start right. Now, when you look at the fact, let's now go back. That if I'm right, we can do something really beautiful here. We can try to go into the Semitic tradition. We can keep switching and say that if the Athma Singh is correct, then he's going to have to corroborate constantly left and right. I'm going to argue that the Garden of Eden is actually a metaphor. I don't believe that all of humanity started from two beings and lots of incest for spiritual, moral, and physiological reasons. I think it's impossible and not desirable. I actually think that humanity cropped up in various places around the world at roughly the same time. Something I've not written about, but for the future maybe. But Eden is when souls started manifesting, because Eden is full of animals. Then we're told eventually that humans turned up, and then souls take the form. We're told that these souls were elsewhere, but that only happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good or bad and the snake. So when you look at a tree, whether you're looking at the brain, when you realize that the snake is the electrical body, yeah, and the tree of the choice of good or bad is a double hemisphered brain, which looks like a tree. And when you look at the roots going into the ground of a tree, they're exactly like the way that the roots on the nervous system bundle up at the end of the spine.
And
And the
our
spine
hair.
and the spine looks like a snake because that's where our electrical signaling moves up or down.
Wow.
And central to this understanding is to remember that your heart formed before your brain. Yes, your heart formed before your brain. And so the heart has always been sending more information to your brain than your brain has been sending to your heart. Sikhi as a marg, a marg to die, ag fire. Sikhi as a marg, what it's about is dying. Now, when you look at ancient mystic symbolism, not just Buddhist, you'll see people with a flaming heart. The fire is starting from the heart and then absorbing Buddha's head. Buddha, intellect, dha to ascend above. Buddha is the opposite. A Buddha is a fool. Why? Because they're do. Sanskrit means to go, to vibrate downwards. Da means above. Not my opinion. You'll find these, you look deep enough. So you realize, now that's a good example, that these very sounds, like if I say do, there is a major sense of my body vibrating faster and lower. Whereas if I say da, I say faster. There seems to be something going upwards. I have to physically go whereas is behind the throat. Uses the throat to chuck out. So there is this sense of movement. So essentially, Gurbani upon that basis is essentially like the perfect doctor of the universe taking the instrument of the body. And notice that the flute of Krishna has 7 holes, the 7 chakra body, right? Yeah, and Maharaj is essentially playing that flute of those 7 chakras. So the North African tradition seems to have given us a very interesting understanding. Chak means position, Ra means multiple things, chakra means circular movement. So I'm going to argue that there's certain points in the body where energy flows like it elsewhere, but it actually concentrates more and energy moves circularly. So chakra Chatur Chakravarti, Chatur Chakrapokade. So, this sense of circular energy, and the heart, the Hirda is right in the middle. And let's go back to Eden. Now, Dhamma means blood in Hebrew, Dham. Adama, there's a state near me called Adama, it just means land. So Adam means on the one hand, it's made up of the idea of land, but also breath. So it's the idea of a human coming out of Earth's elements, I'm going to argue, but significantly the blood is being, highlighted, right? There is no Eve. That's a Western term. The actual term is Chava, Chava, Chava. Now, Chava means,
Wind.
right. Now, what does Hava mean? It means air, wind, breath. You said it. I mean, literally said it. I didn't even need to say it. Now, in the Hebrew tradition, Hava means life breath. So you have blood and you have breath. Right. Now, what I'm arguing is that Adam and Eve are actually a meta-narrative for the divine feminine and masculine. Guru Amar Das Sahib ji says, Shiv Shakti aap upay ke karta hukam vartaya. Maharaj makes it very clear that this is a universe of duality. Maharaj makes it very clear that it can be seen as feminine as masculine. Maharaj also makes it very clear that there is energy manifesting Shakti and there is destruction of that energy Shiv. Maharaj makes it very clear that the Shiv, the masculine, is a destructive element, and Maharaj makes it very clear that the Shakti is the lower material element. So on that basis, we can say things like this. Now, people will look and they'll giggle, but I'm just showing you how magnetism works. One is at 90 degrees. Magnetism sounds a bit like Ma, doesn't it? Mag, yeah? An electric El, the Hebrew term for God. They operate at 90-degree angles to each other. And there's one going in and out of a zero. All code is a 1-0. And yes, that's sex. That is committed by the sixth chakra down. Sex is Latin for six. And it has 6 petals. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm writing a tract called Chakramatics. And as you probably guess, what it's doing is it's proposing a new understanding regarding chakras. And I'm trying to show how we can use Gurbani to unlock certain things. So yes, the North African tradition seems to have given us some understanding. So now let's keep that in mind while we're looking at Adam and Eve. Yeah, because this is where the understandings of this North African tradition came from. All those 22 Hebrew letter sounds were pictures on North African walls. That's where these sounds came from, right?
22 seems like an interesting number because hopefully after this we'll talk about also the musical tradition from Gurbani. But for the Sangat, I don't think we've mentioned that you're actually based in Ethiopia. I don't think we mentioned at the start. Yeah.
Anji.
But sorry.
No problem. Ethiopia, because the Greeks decided to name this country after Ether, the first and fifth divine element. They actually believed all their gods came from here. So just to make that point. So, okay. So I'm going to say that the heart kind of represents Adam. So when we say that the Eve was made out of the rib, I'm going to argue that actually the ribs are shaped like the lungs because that's actually what they're protecting. They're protecting the lungs. Yeah. Right. Notice how lung has the term ung in it. Limbs from what? The limbs from the breath, I'm going to argue. Now, whereas the heart is described as 12 petals, no one mentions the fact that we have 24 ribs. We have 12 plus 24 equals 36. And 12 is the first element, air, 12th minute, and 24 is water. Blood is mainly made from water. And 12 times 24 equals 432. 432,000 is a radius of the sun. So I almost, when I say I almost understand why, I understand why some of the ancients worship the sun. It's really obvious. However, Namo Suraj Suraj, Namo Chandar Chandare. Why does Guru Gobind Singh Ji state that? Because Maharaj is trying to tell us that as more kirpa is done on you on an intellectual level, on a physical level, but ultimately on a spiritual level, you're kind of not going to be someone who's gambling in the casino. You're going to want to cash in your chips early, and you're going to want to end up either worshipping something or energy manipulation of that thing, and you're not going to carry on letting go. And you're going to end up, like, I can see why people worship the sun. For, in my opinion, aside from the Guru's physical form, there is no physical teacher that's ever manifested that's as great as the sun. Apart from the Gurus is who I put above that. That's basically it. because the sun, being the origin of the solar system, is going to lead by definition to many other aspects of the solar system. So, for instance, the sun is a whirling ball of plasma. And the way it revolves, it takes a different amount of time to revolve here than it does there. There it takes 36 days, roughly, 36. But its equator, equator, by the way, it takes 24. Now 36 plus 24 gives us 60, establishing a sexagesimal system. Remember that if you take all the seconds in a day, 60 times 60 times 24, in other words, seconds times minutes times hours, you get 86400, and the sun's diameter is 432 times 2, 864.
Wow.
These things aren't coincidences. It's not even a coincidence that Leonardo da Vinci made sure that Vitruvian Man, the radius is 4.32 inches. I believe he knew, whether he stated it or not, that the very divine design of the solar system and everything around us is repeated at every level. You mentioned it earlier, fractal. And that's what Vaheguru does. Vaheguru designs in and out of themselves. So let's just describe how that looks like. I am the one. I want to operate as duality, and I realize I'll do it as a triplicate. Well, 12 times 3 is 36. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6, which is the square root of 36. 6 gurus, 36 authors in general. So these creational dynamics, they're essentially, repeated to us over and over again. Baisal, what specific point did you want me to focus on?
So I wanted to just interject here, which was, yeah, so you mentioned very nice about Leonardo da Vinci. I believe he wrote that he drew that after returning from Egypt. So he must have had some insights there. But
Egypt, where the Great Pyramid of Giza
yes,
is 432 long cubits wide.
That's, yeah.
It's a computer. And through Guruji's Kirpa, Maharaj has blessed me with novel mathematical discoveries. Wow. So it turns out that the side slope angle of the Pyramid of Giza, 51.84 degrees, is the sun's tilt angle. So imagine the formless taking form. Before that sun, which has no core, takes form, before that we could say there's an inclination. It's as if the formless has touched it and inclined it.
Which is why the pagans, and now they worship the sun, because before they had any enlightened beings, they would worship the sun, because in Scotland there's essentially, like, they call them ley lines, like energetic signature, and the one between Iona, I think Loch Lomond, and some of the places in Edinburgh is the same as the pyramids, because that is also the divine signature. So even in UK, and I think after the settlements were then taken away and churches were placed on top of the same geographic locations facing the sun. But before we go into the Western world, I'd love just to wrap up on our Gurbani understanding. And you mentioned the sexagesimal system, which was the sun, but why the gurus have used that in our Puratan Kirtans. And we've talked before with Jasvir Kaur on the dialogues, but perhaps give us some insight into why mathematically they must have used this.
Okay, so if you look at the term of rag clearly encodes the term ra and ug.
Okay. Sunfire.
I should stop at that point.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that itself is a bit like, okay, are we actually saying that Maharaj is telling us something about the path that electromagnetothermodynamics takes? Because that's what I call fire. So when we see flames, that isn't fire. Because if that was the case, if that was fire, if the flames were fire, yeah, and notice that flames begins with a sound from fa. Fa is fa in Gurmukhi, and it's the 27th, 3 times 3 times 3, and 72 reversed in Gurmukhi. And by the way, the sun tilts at 7.2 degrees. So the discovery I made was that, again, self-generative mathematics, self-generative, the sign of a perfect creator, that one thing leads to another and it just happens. And it's just mind-blowing how it is even intrinsically integral. Like, you can't find the beginning or the end, right? Because there is no beginning or end. That's the clue. 7.2 times itself, 7.2 gives us the side slope angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. 51.84. And when you take these numbers, and I'm arguing contraction expansion, notice that 1.8 is in the middle, 51.84. Well, 1.8 looks like 108, doesn't it? And 54 on the outside is 108 divided by 2. Are we being told that somehow light is a division of the name? You know, and this is encoded through the sun's own tilt angle, right? The other thing that I realized was that when you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza from a corner angle, that is to say that you don't look at it from a side as if you're running up the side. You go to one of the corners, so you're looking at like a corner that's going to go down. You know what I mean? Corner angle. That people call that the iris edge. Well, I took the trouble of looking into that. Now, if you look at the apex from that angle, it equals 96. And 96 is what? 60, 12. 96 is what 60 and 36 add up to. So for instance, 36 degrees of the pentagram apex and 60 there. And it's also what Guru Nanak adds up to. And even
It's
more
also
so.
96 crore.
And staying with this idea of intention, of the formulas taking intention, right? The first reference point we can take from the universe, because what is up, what is down, what is left, what is right, which is what is said in Sukhmani, by the way, for anyone who's interested in the cosmology of Gurmat, Sukhmani is an amazing place to start. So what is up, what is left, what is right, what is down, what's the roof, what's the foundation? In fact, Shutti, roof foundation, anyone, is the same upside down or the other way around. And notice that on Shutti 3-6, there's a 9 there. And when we draw the number 6, there's a little 6 there before we draw the inverted 3. So look at that again. We draw a 3 and then we end with a little 9. Then we begin the 6, we start with a little 6, and then we carry on. 96, Guru Nanak. So, and 69, the year they were born, and yin yang is 6-9, right? Yin yang, guru, light, darkness. Now, if you look at the corner angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, what you'll notice is that angle now is different of the apex. It's now 96 degrees. Guru Nanak. Now, why is that super significant? Now, triangle is the first shape of creation, essentially. But it turns out that the ecliptic plane, why is it called that? Because that's a one plane that our planets travel on in terms of, if you look at it as a dish. If you were to look at it as a dish, our planets, that's the reason why we see the planets passing us, because we're on a dish. It's not like all one planet's doing this, one planet's doing that. Do you get it? We're on a plane. It's just bigger orbits. Roughly speaking, we're on a plane. Yeah. Now that plane has a tilt. And that's the first reference point we can take, because we can take a reference point and say, well, what angle is that tilting in relation to the Milky Way? The Milky Way that Guru Sahib talks about at the beginning of Jobi Safdar, that is stirred, the ocean of water, and then a fish emerges in the water. And when we stir, we get the shape of the galaxy as 6-9. Guru Nanak was born in 6-9. Now, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. Yeah. But going back to the specifics of thank you, Rag, right? You see, this is the problem, right? Well, for everyone listening, just to make it very obvious, Ra, obviously North African, nor Indic root term for the sun, for path being taken, and Ag means fire, right? So, and note that the word Rag equals 40, the same as Guru, Jalli, the path. So Rag and Guru equal the same, they equal 40. Now, if you lay out the Rags, there's 60 of them, you get the clock. And that's not the only reason that you get the clock by laying out 60. I'm arguing it's because if you collapse a dodecahedron, first and fifth divine, what I call apex resonance, Maharaj call this Nam, geometrically expressed. If you collapse those 12 faces, each are a pentagon, so they have 5 points. 12 times 5 is 60. So you construct the clock. And Sangaji, you'll see this on the screen now. And around that, recognizing that, what I did was I plotted every single one of the rags. So what I'm saying is that in some shape or form, Maharaj seems to be, remember, there's different times of day. According to some, there's different seasons, according to his rags. So time and space, anyone? So in my opinion, what Maharaj is essentially saying to us, one of the things, because Maharaj can't fully work out yet, but one of the things Maharaj is saying is that when our consciousness electromagnetothermodynamically manifests, Well, these rags are going to be that which releases that lower resonant manifestation. And that's what we're doing kirtan for. Ki in the Japanese tradition means energy. Ji or ki mean the same thing. Rat means blood. It's in Gurbani. So essentially, and if people want to go real deep, let's look at what Bhagat Farid Sahib says. Bhagat Farid Sahib talks about blood, how the blood of Homme or greed has left their body, and now if you cut them, there'll be no blood. Loho, light, loho, iron, luhu, loho, blood. If it wasn't for the iron, if it wasn't for the loho, the iron inside your hemoglobin, right, inside your blood, loho, the light of your mind, your breath, the light of your consciousness couldn't manifest throughout your body through using blood. So you couldn't feel anything, the magnetism, you couldn't do anything. Blood in itself is a fascinating subject. I mean, wow, fascinating subject.
Wow.
But look at how the Indic tradition encodes three major aspects within one word: loho light, loho blood, and loho iron.
Iron. Sarbalo. And that relates to the DNA as well, because that had a stacking with the 108, you said, structure. And so
Hanji,
because I'm a biomedical engineer, I'm interested in this stuff. It's like
oh,
between DNA and music, there's then a resonance there, like blood, iron, light, DNA, music. So you're having that 108 pattern, and that's
Hanji.
releasing that emotion or that negative vibration through the music.
And
That's
remember
amazing.
that, Hanji, and remember that this 108, remember that if you look at the sun's at 864,000 miles, okay, we have an 8 there. Note that 8, 1 to 8, 1 plus 2 plus 3 up to 8 equals 36. That's nice. But also notice that 64 is 8 to the power of 8. So 864 is as if the 8 at the beginning is generating the second part, the 64, because 8 times 8 is 64. So all these numbers, they're so like sacred. Even the sun's numbers backwards, 432, 23 plus 4 is 27. Well, that's 3 cubed, and 72 backwards, 3 times 3 times 3. And 3 times 3 times 3 gives us 3 3s, 33 plus 3 is 36. So that what's called vortex mathematics is actually really a recognition that the mathematical numerical system, in this case, what we could call the decimal system, Deca 10, from Eka, Ek, right? Dek means to see. Is this how the formless decides to perceive themselves? Dasam dwar. Das means means 10, but das also means to tell. Where does Vaheguru tell of themselves to us? मैं तुम्हें किथे दसूंगा dasam dwar. Now, in the Hebrew tradition, the word for nam is davar or dabar. Maharajas use the term dasam davar. So if we say if we say the name or the word in the Bible, or in the Greek we say logos, or in Aramaic we say militai, in Gurbani we say nam. Well, in Hebrew the term is davar or davar. That sounds a lot like dasam davar, doesn't it? 10 is the 1-0, the 1 returning to the O. And the way we spoke earlier about 0, the relationship
And one,
counterclockwise,
magnetism.
and 3 and 6 are reversal of each other. In fact, what I've done is by getting 3 and interlacing it with 6, I've shown that in many ways it shows us how electromagnetic thermodynamics manifests, whereby at a right angle is electric and at the other right angle is magnetism. And in fact, that's because of quaternion creation, because when you do that, what you do is you have 4 sections, 4 face reality, and each one is 9. So 9 times 4 is 36, completion, complete number 9. Remember Sanskrit, the mirror, and Guru Sahib, right? Or if you do it as 90 times 4, you have 360. So once again, the 108 degrees, the pentagon, the dodecahedron, 5 base dynamics. And notice that 5 phi. So here's another conversation. Phi, actually, by the way, wasn't pronounced phi originally. It was pronounced thi. Pi wasn't pronounced pi. It was pronounced p. Right. Now, thi 1.618, essentially, is the way that, and it's implicated in many other things such as the Fibonacci numbers, which again, the word thi keeps turning up. And actually it was Varanasi Gupta in India that came up with those numbers. These Italians are always fibbing with their Fibonacci numbers. Um, but what you'll find is that these dynamics are implicated. Like for instance, when you look at the Fibonacci sequence, so one and then one and one plus one equals two, and then two plus one equals three, and then the previous number with the current number building up and creating spiral dynamics. These are
Mm,
being implicated in Nautilus shells, in so much mathematics, the design of the ear. It's unbelievable. The idea of sequential creation building up. I know.
yeah, the architecture from Undersub.
Hanji. What you realize is that these dynamics fit very well within the pentagon. I believe that those dynamics, that where do they come from? They come from pentagonal dynamics. In fact, if you take a pentagram and draw that the so-called golden
Yeah.
spiral, it keeps hitting every single angle within the pentagram, and that's fractal reality coming about. Now, when you look at cymatics with water, and you see a certain frequency, 5 pentagon inwards, outwards. Well, 5 outwards and 5 inwards is 10. That's a 10 numbering system coming out and returning back in.
Mm,
And look at 108. 108 as a term literally is telling us about the decimal numbering system. How? We're being told there is one totality, there's the O, and it's formless, and there are 8 other digits that this 1O expresses itself out. And
wow.
that is 1O and 8 other digits. And that is the 1 to 0, because there are 1O and there are only 8 other digits. And
Mm,
there's 8, sum up to 36, as in like 1 to 8. And 8 is infinity. Notice that.
yeah.
These things, none of these things are coincidences. We live in a fractal universe, and if we give attention to very basic terms, so when Maharaj repeats certain words, we should really, really pay attention to them. So, for instance, to give you one example, Maharaj says "Arke," constantly in Jap at one point, and I'm going to argue that there's really deeper meanings to some of these things.
Mm,
Like Akhenaten was called that because Akhenaten means the one who proclaims the sun. Now, if I say Akhe, that means to proclaim.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
The sun proclaims, the moon proclaims, the universe proclaims. They all proclaim. What were we waiting to get our headphones and listen to the sun say, listen, the Vaheguru created me. I just thought I'd let you know. And I'll sing it because we're buying. I'm going to say that singing Gave isn't the Gave we thought. That through their very
Oh,
existence,
it's the emission of a being.
whether it's their radius, their measurements, because remember that the Earth
Yeah.
is 108 times the sun's own diameter away from it. So
Wow.
if you take the sun's diameter, which is 864,000 miles, and you do that 108 times, that's where Earth is located.
That puts a new
So
meaning to Gavier.
Hanji. And these terms like in I'm not I won't talk about it too much now, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to in future try to talk about how essentially the moon is one of the best symbols for Guru Nanak. If we want to understand some of the metaphysics of who Guru Nanak Sahib was,
Mm-hmm.
what they represent, and that's not just because of the radius being 108.
Reflection. Mm-hmm.
This idea of the formless being an inexplicable light, yet
Mm,
through manifestation as a solid rock as a human,
mm.
we get back to the formless who was 108. That,
Wow.
that paradox, that dichotomy, you could call it. That is in many ways that is quite mind blowing when you
Mm-hmm.
think about it. Hello? Hanji.
So I want to be respectful of your time as well.
Up to you,
So
Bicep. We talk far, I don't mind. We can finish now. We can finish tomorrow. I'm happy.
so um, I just for the rag element, I also
Oh, sorry,
realized
Bicep.
no, it's
Let's
good.
focus. You got me.
I
I get
I
you. I
realize
get
like
you.
the
I
the
get you.
the
I get
stringed
you.
instruments are quite
I get you.
important there because
Thank you, Bicep.
having string instruments
Why?
effectively makes us very
Why?
sensitive to that vibration, right?
Why?
Because that's why I was talking to Dr. Sundar
Oh,
Singh, Gagadeep Kaur, and Jasveer Kaur on the podcast, and we were talking about the different instruments the gurus created, obviously before harmonium came, and how these like Taos, Dilruba, Jhoty effectively got us sensitively attuned. And now you've explained
and
with our DNA and blood and light. So, is there anything else around rag that the Sangha should know?
sorry. There's so much of
It's
I
all
keep.
good. It's all good.
So if we look at the fact that Maharaj has used 60. Okay, so what I did was I plotted all the rags around that. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine collapse a dodecahedron into its 12 faces, or you just take the clock, because they're the same thing. Same thing. And then you allocate a rag. Yeah. What you'll end up with the first rag, so the first minute, 6 degrees in, because each minute is 6 degrees, isn't it? So the first minute will be 6 degrees. You end up with asa. That's the name of the first rag.
Ragasa.
Hanji. And asa is era and sasa. 2, 4. 2 plus 4 equals 6. Turns out that rag asa is positioned at 6 degrees. Also notice that if I say asa, that means the breath has arrived.
Asa.
Which is very mind-blowing. Also notice that if I just say 2, 4, that gives me 24. So I'm being told that there's a 24th teacher about to tell me something. And also 24, like I said earlier, 0, 60, 12, 24, and 360. These are all values that can equally be put to that point. Now note that, look, there's no acrobatics that I'm using here. By the way, ake means to proclaim. Now, if I say archangel, whatever, keep that in mind.
Archbishop.
To proclaim. If I shorten it and say that means to see. This universe is an entity which proclaims and then it perceives itself. That's all it's doing. That's all it's doing. Ake. I, to proclaim. Right. So going back to rag, right? Yeah. So what I did was, so like I said, there's no acrobatics, right? Yeah. What I did was I put the first rag asa there, right? Yeah. And then at the end, you can imagine, for those who know, the 60th rag will be Jai Javanti. Hana? Jai means victory, by the way. Hana? J is a 13th letter, and it's about to return into 13, about to return to 12ness. Well, it all came from a 13th point, the number Guru Sahib stopped at. 12ness, coming out. Now, that's the last rag. So Sangatji, understand that's all I've done. As the rags appear in Gurbani, I've put them sequentially. Now, I did one more thing and thought, if this turns out to be what I think it's going to be, then I'm going to stop now. And I can't study this further. I need to find an expert on rag Kirtan, because now there's a whole new chapter that requires more time, more people on it. Who knows, maybe AI we can apply to it. What I did was I went to the 6th minute specifically, because I know that's 36 degrees. 6 times 6 minutes is 36 degrees. And the 6th minute will be the 6th rag, 36 degrees. And that is called Shiri. The 6th rag to appear in Gurban is called Shiri. Shiri is made up of 2 letters, 4, Sasa, and Rara, 3, 2. Now that gives us the radius of the sun, 432, but it also adds up to 36. And lo and behold, that's 36 degrees. So Asa encodes 6 degrees and other things, and Shiri encodes 36 degrees as well as other things. So I'm talking about creational dynamics now. I stopped at that point. I noticed other certain things were gone is at 36th minute and other things, but I stopped and thought, no. In my mind, maybe it's just a vehicle, maybe there's other people, but here's what I need to do. And I know I can't do it by myself, so I need the Sangha to help me. I need someone who is very, very familiar with Rag Kirtan as a technology. So in other words, the 8 different sound forms, anyone? Interesting. Sa, Ram, all those, right? I need to spend some time with someone like that where I ask them questions and they're going to look at stuff that I'm doing and find things I can't even see, right? And so imagine this. Imagine if we can construct a resource, and that resource is a mathematical, numerical, geometric study of each of the different rags. Now that can be represented as a pattern. It may have to be represented in ways that I don't quite understand yet.
Like a yantra, like how yantras are basically like visual sound currents.
Hanji. So like cymatics, right?
Yes.
So the Western word for that is cymatics.
Okay, I didn't know that.
No problem. Notice that cymatics encodes sim, C-Y-M. Unfortunately, in Latin, there's multiple sound forms. Sim is their name. It seems like someone knows what they're saying when they named cymatics, cymatic, C-Y-M. Interesting, huh? So in my opinion, what we need to do is we need to look at not just that, but we need to find a way of empirically trying to evidence the way that Rag affects people emotionally. And our emotion, the motion of electricity throughout the body, causing us to feel a certain way. And that's all I've done. I've not tried to go further on that journey. 60 is very important. I should also say that the Fibonacci numbers have a 60 sequence where they repeat after 60. They also repeat after every 24. After every 24, they repeat. And what kind of repetition is this? If you take the Fibonacci numbers, you can test this up to the 24th one, and you can carry on and do more sets of 24. They'll get ever bigger and bigger. Now, if you apply a process of compression, that means that let's just say one of them is 13. It is 8 plus 5 in the sequence. Then what you do is you take the 1 and 3 and you call it 4. Now you can do that to every single number, even the biggest one. Now, when you do that, every 24 numbers, guess what each of those compressed figures, if you add them up, add up to? They add up to 108. So 108 keeps getting repeated on a 24 base cycle. So when we say I've paraphrased that. I would have probably got it slightly wrong. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, Gurbani, the perfect teacher of this age, is telling us that now is a very important time. We're going into the age of Aquarius. In the Semitic tradition, Aleph is not just A, it's E, it's I. In many ways, you could argue it kind of represents O and U. So when we say things like these words, maybe we now will understand why the Greeks took A and E and joined them together. So when they wrote A, G, and C, they always joined the A and the E. Now the A is their first letter and E is their fifth letter. 5 again. And Greek has 24 sound forms. For anyone who's really interested in how these numbers just keep repeating themselves. In fact, I found some interesting parallels between Greek and Gurmukhi. I really believe that Greek was created with very good intentions. Latin, I believe, was very, very bad intentions.
And we'll get into that as well. So what? Thank you for explaining that. So what you're kind of showing is that the way the rags are laid out is like obviously creational dynamics fundamental to the fractal system of our universe, but also that how we can use that for our like emotions, but show that in a mathematical sense, in a geometrical sense, in an intellectual sense.
It's crazy. Like if we take, okay, what should we call Guru Nanak Sahib Ji? I've said Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, huh? But I could argue I don't have a right to call that person Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. If I'm going to argue, have I asked them what they should be called? Guys, this is a playful point. Don't take this too seriously. This is semantics. I'm trying to make a philosophical point by using cheap semantics. Okay, so bear with me. Please, yeah. What's the word for it? Bear with me. Okay. Is that what Guru Nanak Sahib Ji told me to call themselves? So we'll have to say, okay, let's find a place where Guru Nanak Sahib Ji addresses themselves. So yes, in Gurbani we know Na Anek, not just Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, the other gurus, suggesting that someone or something is transmitting to them. It's not just them now. That's a fascinating conversation for another time. However, Maharaj does give themselves an official title. Mahalla Bahella. Now, it just so happens that Mahalla Bahella, if we add Mahalla, Mamma 30, Ha 5, Lalla 33, and then we add Ik, Mahalla Bella, we get 69. Which is obviously inverse of what Guru Nanak equals. 69 is a yin yang. And I'm going to argue that this is the Guru coming into 3-based creation. So remember what Gurbani says? That creation happens because the formless takes form as avatars, and the Guru is required to get everyone across.
Wow.
And look at how we found it there. Huh?
Wow. Amazing. Yeah, like the time of day, the seasons all match to all of the rags, and with each of the gurus and each of their flavors, each of their essences, each of the rases.
Hanji, 4 seasons, right? Chatur Chakravarti, 4 seasons. What's giving rise to 4 seasons? I would argue it's divine first and fifth. I'm actually arguing that 18th of April, if you know what I mean, as in not like to go into all the issues about, as in theoretically 30, 30, 30, and then the 4th month, 18th of April, that should be the New Year's Day. 18 times 4, by the way, equals 72.
Oh, bless you. So before we go on to the we've looked at how Gurbani and all of the geometry and cosmology can actually liberate us and why it's like that. But before we go into like the control of into Latin, you briefly mentioned that. I would love to just touch on. You mentioned people, the creation story of Adam and Eve, but then also, I'm Western educated, so we're looking at Homo sapiens coming in Tanzania, which is not too far, I guess, from Ethiopia. Um,
And
how how do we see this uh, in the Gurmukhi understanding? Because
Adam and Eve.
no, like Homo sapiens in
Angie.
Africa and Tanzania. Before we go into the Latin understanding, because I think people might have questioned that earlier on, that they might have said, hold on a second, I believe humans evolved and then we came out of Tanzania and then we spread across the globe. So you kind of challenge that.
Angie. Like, okay, wow, okay. So what I'm going to say is that I hate trying to pretend I know things that I don't know
Okay.
or I know about things I don't because that's misleading to the
Mm-hmm.
Sangatana. And anyone who misleads other people, that's a grave debt karmically,
Yeah.
just to let you know. So, however, so I'm going to call it a theory, right?
Okay.
Um, so if we look at Lucy, Lucy is a name given to
Yes.
pretty much the most ancient set of bones. Notice that Lucy, Lucifer. I very much detest the way that European naming convention gives away their beliefs. The
Mm.
Vatican owns a telescope called Lucifer. It's an abbreviation, Lucifer, in America. And so this isn't me just saying that they're doing it in such coded ways. They do it openly as well. Um, so they get to name things. Um, and whoever gets the name carries a massive amount of power. That's another. We're talking about naming here, and this is a whole conversation for another day.
Because it
But
frames reality, right? In a certain way, once you've named
this
something.
is, yeah, he who names claims, he who claims owns. This is something we'll have to discuss in terms of colonialism.
Yes.
You know, but going back to the sorry, the my multiple Homo
Migrating. Yeah.
sapien arisal theory. I'm not the first one to say this, by the way, but I intentionally haven't read too deeply into it because I want to form my own ideas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Just to let you know, I haven't read any Plato. I've read one or two lines online, Socrates. I intentionally, at this stage, I'm hoping just to be inspired by Gurbani, then later on write stuff about comparative stuff. So I'm not influenced.
Okay.
That makes sense. Okay, so firstly, from a scientific point of view, it's perfectly possible for species to arise that are so similar that you'd think they're the same or they came from the same branch when they haven't. This happens within the bird world, the type of finches you get on different parts of the world, all the rest of it. So I would say that this idea that all of humanity, or let's just say that the ancestors of humanity came from one place. And notice that the word ancestor also encodes Ankh. Ankar
Mm.
means seed in the Indic tradition. Ankush means something else, which we won't go into. Ankh means a seed of life or a symbol for life in the North African tradition. So very interesting, ancestors, because C can mean ka or sir. You see how they encode things in plain sight and pull meaning from things in plain sight? So firstly, from a logical point of view, even though Gurbani mentions Baba Adam, yeah, Gurbani, in my opinion, and people can argue this, does not subscribe to the view that humanity arose from people who weren't even that old. Because Gurbani, for one, mentions of daughters who are by a aeons, by a magnitude older, thousands of years. Essentially speaking, the Judeo-Christian tradition only believes Adam's about 6,000 years old. You have to
Mm-hmm.
remember that. Um, so um, Firstly, if that was the case, then humanity, because I've already mentioned that I don't treat the story of Adam and Eve as literal. For me, it's a
Yeah.
parable about these
Metaphysical.
higher beings having to go through reincarnation, and then the human form is what allows them to transcend. Or they go back into the animal life reincarnation. They were made to wear skins. That doesn't mean fur coats. That means that soul had to start incarnating as animals. So why do I mention that? Because what I'm saying is that it's allegorical. So first, I'm saying it's allegorical to start off with.
Mm.
We have to stop this whole incest idea. And secondly, if Adam and Eve had children, science proves that their children would have been so disabled, they would have probably lost their fertility. There would have been so many health issues. There would have been so many issues that humanity couldn't have really survived. Like when you look into extinction level events, like cheetahs, for example, science seems to have proved that at one point there are only 6 cheetahs left on planet Earth. In terms of genetic studies, have traced back all the genealogy of all the cheetahs on planet Earth down to 6 cheetahs. And they believe the reason this is the case is that at some point, the world population, which is to say the African population, and then I even want to say African or particular African countries, that populations for some reason went down to 6. There could be theories why. Cheetahs were used for hunting. They were hooded, almost like birds of prey, by Indus Valley, Middle Eastern kings and others. And maybe there's reasons for it. But whatever the case, I believe they're telling the truth. I've got no reason to believe they're lying. Now, cheetahs had to massively inbreed as a result. That seems to have led to 1 or 2 issues. They also look very different to other cats. So even though major inbreeding can happen, it does lead to issues. Yeah. Now, for a population to get down to 2, it'd be very difficult for that population to deal with the effects. I'll give you one example. It's very
I think the point for the Sangat wasn't the Adam and Eve story, because that was metaphysical. It was more about coming out of like the Africa or world view, and we were talking about Lucy, so we're talking about naming. Yeah.
See, here's a problem. After Lucy was found, they found older remains in Turkey. Because even though, because I'm a father, I have children, I don't get to, at the level of an academic, keep up to speed with it. I do try to dip in every now and again. And a few years ago, they found older remains in Turkey. And remember, Turkey is a place of the Göbekli Tepe civilization.
Yes.
Which essentially proved that this idea that Egyptian civilization, essentially civilization in general, is only 6,000 years old is utter bullshit. Because now we're talking about 12,000 years plus.
Wow.
For those who've really paid attention to North African evidence coming out, the water damage on the Sphinx is over 6,000 years old now. How it's been, some people are dating that to 12,000 years. And according to some geologists, now stepping into geology, there was a cataclysm where water levels rose 12,000 years ago. Some people believe that's a cycle, a 12,000 year cycle, that we're up for it now, just to let you know. There's these cycles now. In terms of, so the water Sphinx damage means, well, that was actually there over 12,000 years ago. And just to let you know, what's more interesting is that I'm not the only person. There's strong evidence to suggest that Sphinx was at Pharaoh's head. Originally, it was a lion's head. But the Sphinx was an actual lion's head, right? But so Lucy isn't the oldest remains, for instance. And I think that as they find remains, they'll just go back and forth. And it will be around that area. It will be just above or just below the equator. It'll be, I believe it'll be around that area. However, remember, bones do disintegrate over time. So this idea, like to say, and I'm the same when it comes to language, people that say Sanskrit is the oldest language in the world, they're acting really silly. That, what they're really doing is that they're proving that they haven't taken the time to spend even 1 hour of study online, because the internet is amazing for learning. And what they're really doing is trying to score ethno-political religio points by stating that Sanskrit is not the most ancient language in the world.
Would that be older than Phoenician?
There's argument for, firstly, the script that we use for Sanskrit isn't the oldest. And a lot of Indians don't realize that. The Devanagari script is not the first script to write Sanskrit. There's a script called Brahmi, which actually looks like Aramaic and the Ethiopian script slightly. That's one thing I hope to do. I hope to do a comparative study of Aramaic, the writing of Jesus, Ge'ez, the Ethiopian script, and Brahmi, the most ancient script that was used to write Sanskrit. It's got all sorts of weird letters, like a circle with a dot in it. Oh, Vaisab, it's really interesting.
Wow.
Brahmi, of Brahma, of the creator. But something I forgot to tell you earlier was, Guru Nanak Sahib just called themselves a Mahalla. Mahal means form. Mahal also means dirt, the idea of something higher taking on the form of lower resonance, right? Yeah. Well, Melek, Menelik, Malik, Arabic, they've come to mean chief. They previously meant king. But originally they actually all meant angel. All these terms actually meant angel originally. And I then started looking for the oldest term I could find on planet Earth for the term angel. It took me to North Africa. And one of the terms they had for angel there was Mahallah. Now, does that sound a lot like Mahallah to you? Now, what's really crazy is the Ge'ez alphabet, as in what Amharic is written and has 33 letters. That just got my attention straight away, 33 sound forms. And the first
Wow.
letter, yeah, is let me get this right. It's a H, then it's a L, and then it's like another H, and then a M. Now, when you take those letters backwards, they say the word Mela, right? So so and this isn't just something like I'm going to corroborate this. When you look at the name of the language, sorry, the letters, they're called Ge'ez. Sounds a bit like the pyramidal Giza, but anyway, Ge'ez. Now the term they have for God here is Exabia, Exabia. That encodes Exabia, Exabia, Igiza, Ge'ez. So even the way that these sound forms are used commonly, whether it's the term for God or an angel, the way they come out, or cross tradition. In my opinion, what we're seeing at this time, Juga Navera, it's Aquarius, it's from the Latin aquarium. Aquarium means a tank of water. The ancients know that this universe is essentially some super state of water. And Aquarius for me is it is the first symbol, because first there was an ocean of water in it, and then there was Pisces, there was much of that. I see. So I'm actually proposing
Wow.
a different procession of the zodiac. And just to let you know, Taurus on my one falls on number 4, when you do them as 12. Now, number 4, Jad, is written the same as a Taurus symbol.
There's so much there. Wow. So before I would just like to end on actually one of the things that we did talk on, which was now going to, we've noticed how powerful words are, etymology is in labeling, and like the world that I swim in, as a UK born person, is English, and in the Western world. And we were talking about the words like capital, or like Latin has double or triple phonetics like C, K, and Q. And for people listening, I think it would be very helpful, and for them to be mindful of the words they use, the
And you,
words people use with them, the words they hear in the news if they're watching the news, the words that are happening. You're also talking about in America, why is there structures like Roman or Greek structures for the White House?
and
So if you could also, so the way I like to frame it is we talked about the Gurbani, and how the universe is working and how we can align ourselves with the fractal that is the universe, but then also how this understanding can be used in an effectively, in a hidden way,
you
can
abused.
convertedly be abused, and people might
And you.
not be aware of that. And I think it's important that people listening to this can also be aware of this side as well. So if you can help us here.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get slightly mystical. And while I'm talking, I'm going to make certain allusions. So if you look at, there is no place called Rome, it's Roma, Roma. Ro means head in the Semitic tradition. Resh, the 20th letter, R, is a picture of a head. Yeah. And notice that Roshni refers to the light coming out of someone's head or face in the Indian tradition. Ma means mother. So raw ma it sounds like it's encoding the head of the mother. In Revelations, the beast is said to have 7 heads. In reverse, Roma, not my opinion, sounds amor. Amor is the Latin for love.
Love.
Okay. Now notice that Lati, spelled backwards, is Ital. So the term Italian, Ian is a suffix, Italian, Belgian. It's nothing to do with, you get the idea. But Ital Lati. So notice that Latin, Ital are again reversals. Okay. Now, if you look at the ancient if we relate now, let's get into the Vatican, because we have to talk about the Vatican if we talk about the Latin language. Now, Vatica, if you look for the etymology of Vatican, it's a pointless journey. You're not going to find much joy. Maybe you could argue that Vat relates to the fact mystically that this is the whore who has, made drunk nations, um, you know, because that's the description for the whore of Babylon. And notice that vat is what originally you actually put wine in. That's what wine was put in originally, vats, which is interesting. And vat in itself encodes vav, the sixth letter, six being something which can be seen as negative, and at, aleph, dav. So these terms, in many ways, like they seem to be constructed in interesting ways. Now, here's what's really interesting. What I found is the only convincing argument. There was a goddess, she had horns, and she had a triangle because that represented the vagina. She was a goddess of an inverted red triangle. Okay, she was called Vatika. Vatika, there's a brand of shampoo here called Vatika.
Yeah, we also have it.
Yeah, yeah. It's all because why? Because she was worshipped internationally. Another secret they're keeping from humanity is that spirituality was often worshipped internationally. That can be proved. For instance, the word bull English, the word bell Irish, the word bell Indic, they all mean bull. So she was worshipped internationally in the Indus Valley and by the Etruscans. The Etruscans are who were there before the Italians. It's their script that essentially gave rise to some elements, I'd argue, of Latin. That they had taken the sound forms from the Hebrew. Okay, so now let's look at the term capitalism. Why am I looking at the term capitalism? So the Greek term kappa, yeah, comes from the Hebrew term calf. So Greek basically came from the Hebrew sound forms. People can look into this. It's a fact, not an opinion. And then Latin came from those Greek letters. So alpha Greek from aleph became the letter A. You see?
Wow.
B, C. Notice firstly how they're dropping all these extended names. Aleph, Bet, Dal, the Gimel, A, B, C. They don't want us to decode information straight away. Right, that's what I'm going to say. The other thing is that they mix up things. So where G was a third, G, 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 Gimel was a third sound form. Very important when you consider words like Gu, Gu, which is either 8, just a G, Gaga, 8, which sums to 36. Yeah, or in the Hebrew tradition, it would just be 3. That means, that 8 sums to 36 and 3 times 36 is 108. If we take you could look at this in so many ways. This commonality isn't by coincidence, yeah? And Gimel, mel means form, yeah? Made up of the term ma, which is symbolized by water, and la, which means to attach. Oh my God, the term mel encodes the idea of attaching through water. These things go deep. So when you look at Latin, you think to yourself, well, firstly, why have you taken G from the third position and put C there?
Mm-hmm.
And then not only have you done that, but you've put a letter whose sound is encoded elsewhere through two other letters. Because if I use the term C and say the word ceiling, well, S could have fulfilled that. And if I use the term C and say country, well, K could have fulfilled that. So what they've actually done is they've taken a very important sound form, and they've obfuscated it. They've hidden it, and I've proved it, behind 3 different symbols, 3 different letters. And one of the reasons why they've done this is because Latin is double forked. It doesn't want us to essentially, transcend the Tower of Babel, B-A-B, like look of God, L. Babel comes from Babel, the Tower of Babel. And what was that? Where multiple languages confused humanity. They don't want us to find our way back. That's why it's very, very important for Latin to take over the world, right? And so if you take Africa, even the Oromo language, which is a state language here where I live, because Oromo people are the biggest ethnic group, even here, their language is written in the Latin script. Amarinya, Amharic isn't, because they weren't actually occupied, they weren't colonized. So even across Africa, all these languages are used in Latin script. Only Ethiopia managed to, stop that. But things they couldn't stop. So for instance, here, many people say ciao. Now, ciao means hello in Latin, doesn't it? And notice the term hello encodes hell. But ciao means chaos. It actually means chaos. Order, ab, ciao means order the light, order, to ascend. Order, ab, ciao. Ab is the beginning, A-B, order from the beginning through chaos. So when you go around saying ciao to someone, you're actually wishing them chaos.
Wow, and like we spoke about, like when we're using the words, that's the whole power at the metaphysical level.
Oh, and they invert meanings. If I say menu ciao aya, that means love. So it's not really a coincidence. Now let's take the idea of capital letters. There's not many scripts across the world in the East that have lowercase letters and uppercase letters. So again, they hid the formation by doubling up. There is no benefit. Tell me, how did all these other scripts in the world survive without having capital letters?
Wow.
How did these how did these they survive? Because there's no need. I'm going to argue it's because they wanted to again obfuscate. So take the letter A. The letter A is like this, isn't it? Yeah. Right. It's A. Yeah. Well, originally the letter A was like this. It was a bull's head. So the first images that emerge in cave paintings, the first thing that humans seem to want to draw, these cows, bulls, it's also the first letter. It found its way. So understanding the idea of consciousness taking form graphically, pictorially, we have to also understand that relates to letters. And they, through one fell swoop, have hidden that by just inverting it.
So I guess people, listeners who are listening to this might be wondering, well, who is it that was able to get this original understanding of, like you said, the divine way of talking or communicating, and then being able to actually manipulate that? Like, who would be able to have that kind of deep understanding and then that power in order to change that?
It's to be honest, if you have access to information, like look at AI right now. Look at AI right now, and anyone who's quite intelligent will realize that the amount of power, and now AI sounds almost like AI one eye, right? Interesting. Anyway, when someone realizes that anyone who can, on the one hand, influence what we think, and then on the other hand, take feedback of what we're behaving like, and then keep putting that into a self feedback system, they're going to have a massive amount of power. And notice the way power sounds a bit like Barney. It begins with P. And Wa sounds like wondrous, Wa, right? Now they're going to have a massive amount of power, and the reason is that they're going to be shaping humanity. Unfortunately, what we're entering now is a great era of manmat, because now the way the mind is being shaped through social media isn't social media. It should be called socialization. Mediation of socialization is what it should be called, because now the way they're mediating, probably from Medea, if people want to chase the breadcrumbs as in a location, the way that they're mediating our socialization is scary. The way they're able to understand what we're thinking psychosomatically, our heart rate and all the rest of it. And what this is creating is an internet. An intern is a prisoner. The DARPA, deep state American military, entity, which doesn't even report its budget. That's how deep and dark it is. And by the way, Darpan means screen in Sanskrit, the thing that you look at the future in, Black Mirror, which is where the term Black Mirror, prophesying the future, where it got its name from, no doubt. And Darpan, if you look at that, they're called Darpa. To me, that's just Guru Sahib's way of giving me clues, saying, listen, you're kind of right. And just picture Elon Musk's beautifully polished black silicate glass in these satellites, going around planet Earth. He's clearly positioning himself as some kind of AI king. It's very obvious. And so, okay, so let's go back to Latin. Let's get specific. So Lat and Lot refer to two goddesses. They're mentioned in the Quran, in fact. And these are some of the most ancient names and entities you'll find in that Babylonian, Iraq, Iran, Arabian era. Lot are essentially the goddesses of fertility, of sex, of lower resonant dynamics. Now look what Guru Sahib Ji says, Shiv Shakti Apapaike. Maharaj is not hiding. Maharaj is not hiding from the fact, that there is a connection between lower resonant dynamics and sex. But like even the word sex encodes ek inside it. But unfortunately, there are people that are using these sound forms and understand that these sound forms didn't just come from nothing. I personally believe that essentially it was when higher resonant beings, if you want to call them farishta or angels or surtiyan, whatever you want to call them, It was when they started communicating with particular beings who were spiritual that language emerged. Before that, I believe there was a lot of grunting going on and all the rest of it. So essentially, they're the ones who gave us a sound form, vibratory throat form, and then a language. And then we have Guru Nanak again, who has, how many prophets have turned up and invented their own script? It's actually very hard to think of one.
And then that whole breakdown of, and I believe you were also saying, like, you also mentioned colonization. And I think last time we were talking, I was like, well, you can actually look at anatomy from that point of view and study the anatomy. So colon, I believe you were saying last time, if you wanted
So anatomy, just to show you how they take
yeah.
anatomy, encodes an, which is beginning, anniversary, anum, and atom, anatomy. How does the soul give rise from these beginning points? Abdominals, ab beginning, dominate to dominate, and that's the center of our body where everything else goes around our abs. When you watch fighters, they're all about doing everything around the abs for a reason. Okay. So one thing I want to focus on the word capitalism. That's a major giveaway. Okay. So first, these capital letters. So caput means to kill. So now we're going to go into Latin.
Yes.
So caput means to kill. Capitulate means to be defeated. Yeah. Capital is a bigger letter, but capital is also the main city that you've established yourself.
Captain.
Right, thank you. Captain, someone who attains to the control of the ship. But why? Now let's get smaller. Cap. Cap means head. That's why you put a cap on your head. Capstone on a pyramid, cap. Yeah? Right? Now, when we look at the fact that imperialism chose to name cities as capital cities, chose to name letters as capital letters, chose to use the term Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 hills that the Vatican is based around, right? Yeah? And where they made sacrifices, by the way, the Etruscans made sacrifices, dead animals, potentially humans. That's based on studies now done in Carthage, because there was a question about did they do human sacrifice, and studies in Carthage, which is related to Etruscan religion, have found, well, actually, it seems like they did do human sacrifice. We know it happened in the Semitic tradition from Moloch, which in the Indian tradition, Moloch means wealth. And indeed, Moloch, their greatest wealth, they offered to this god Moloch, their children.
That's interesting, because we were talking about, sorry to cut you off there, but we were talking about the difference in the last podcast between Carthage and Rome and how they represented different things as like water nations versus land nations, the Western Europe. And also we were talking about blood, so the importance of blood in sacrifice. What does that blood actually metaphysically even represent, right? So there's a lot there.
Yeah. And Fij, just to let you know, Fij is like a suffix. You'll get it on the end of other countries' names. So car, body, car. If I wrote that in Gurmukhi, it'd just be 6 ganna. Sorry, gakkana, ganna. Notice that when we write gakka, it looks like number 2. Duality. Very strange, isn't it? So do, which means to descend, do, and number 2 in Gurmukhi. So if we look at that letter right, so your head, your cap, yeah, ka, mental body, arp, yourself, yeah, garb, cap. That's what's being seized. So this is a battle for consciousness, and to seize a language via these letters, capital letters, to totally obfuscate, to seize a place by taking the capital city, because that's where all the money flows from, and roads were understood as blood vessels. By the ancients, that's a whole Nari vessel, Nari road. Anyone? We'll leave that there. Yeah.
Wow.
And Hanji, right? And why is it that the actual hill that the Vatican, which is basically the oldest private bank in the world, currently posing as a church because it helps them? That's all they are. Right, proven by the covering of Nazi God. We can have a whole conversation about this. Proven by the fact that in public they were against Mussolini, but in private they were giving him blessings to come into Ethiopia. Okay, so then all of a sudden we have a Greco-Roman temple on Capitol Hill. So what I'm saying is that this letter, Greek kappa, before that it was kaf. Now in the Hebrew tradition, what it is it's the halfway point in terms of letters. So if you take all the letters 22 and you snap them, calf comes there, and the symbol was a hand. Now a hand has 5 fingers, one, but also a hand is what you take with or you give with. You can take or you can give with a hand. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is obviously the fiveness of a hand, all the rest of it. Now, this gives us a key. When you see the term Catholic religion, Cath, C-A-T-H, Cath. Catholic means, the official meaning means all-encompassing. That's what it means. The hand that's all-encompassing. Is that necessarily a good thing when someone takes everything? Does it necessarily mean they're giving? Hello? I'd say no. So what I would say is that that's just one example of how through sound form from the Semitic tradition into whether it's a naming of letters, the naming of government functions, i.e. capital cities or actual locations, how that actually relates. If I capture someone, you see, we could talk market cap, all these sound forms, they all have ancient origins, and all it's really about is this. First, if we are not people that get stuck to one religion, one nation, one ethnic group, what happens is we become much more able to essentially transcend that Tower of Babel. And in my opinion, Guru Nanak, not the countless. This ain't some human prophet turning up now. This is now the countless. This is not the countless. This is now something beyond. In other words, this is now that entity, enter means external, that has decided to manifest, because we are at the stage now where the original perfect teachings have to be given. So for me, the Khalsa is the perfect Christian. It's not a coincidence that they both have the same sound form, Christian. Greek term Christos means to be anointed. Khalis is from the Arabic. Khalis means to purify. It means lots of other things, but it's the 7th letter of Gurmukhi, by the way, Kapka. But for me, one of the reasons that this is all happening is these multiple languages, or Guru Sahib using Arabic or Persian or Farsi, or Guru Nanak Sahib using the Arabic term for the naming of 0, but using the Indic. These aren't. Why did Maharaj decide to change the numbers anyway? What was broken with Devanagari? Devanagari, the pathways from the gods, suggesting maybe Nagari, the snake-like electrical understanding of sound form. I don't know. Notice that Nag encodes Ag, fire. Even the term Kundalini, Kunda means lock, not my opinion. Da means to ascend. Lean means to attach to. So, whereas normally people attach to these locks, Lork means planet, by the way.
Wow.
Notice how the word clock has Lork in it. I begin with the sound form Lork. And calendar sounds a bit like calendar. God, time and space, dissolution. What I'm saying is that you have to understand that the elites, they're not wasting their time going around doing poxy jobs. They're not losing their money, their generational wealth. They've got libraries that have been around for ages. Let me give you one example. I watched Yaakov Rothschild. He died this year. Jacob. Yaakov means one who wrestles with God. I was watching a very rare interview. And what he did was he went up to a painting in his yard, Wadsworth Manor, massive place in England. And Inga, Germanic fertility of goddess of fertility, Lund, forest, probably from the word Lun, representing the idea of
London.
People's organs, absolutely, people's organs, and a forest. So much of their understanding is around fertility and sex, and this becomes so obvious over time that you're thinking, oh my God, orgasm, orgy, the Hebrew term for light, isn't at the beginning for no good reason. They worship sex, they worship blood, they worship the material realm. But just going back to that point, so we were talking about Latin, we were talking about language, we were talking about the manipulation of it, the reshaping of someone's man. and humanity, right? Um, we were talking about Latin, then we talked about not the Vatican. We got into something else, Baji.
Greco-Roman, was it the structures in America, or was that another point?
There's so much in there, Faisal.
There is.
It, it can be, my biggest challenge has been, and that's why I'm writing tracts. I don't really want to
Yeah.
write a book. Is that every time, I try to explain the small thing, it's like I feel like I've got to explain the bigger thing, and then
Mm-hmm.
it kind of gets lost, right? That's why I'm glad that we focused so much on ik
Like, yeah,
during this,
yeah.
um,
But
because that's going to help the Sangha to kind of do it sequentially.
yeah,
I'm not quite sure what point we were focusing on, what you wanted me to get to. We spoke about capital. Okay, so
yes,
C,
capital.
right, the halfway point,
Yes,
the
yes.
halfway point. Yeah.
22. Yeah.
Right. So bear in mind, 22 is an interesting number because we have 22 amino acids. It's
Mm-hmm.
obviously a doubling of 11. It has its own, we won't talk about that today, but it's the halving. So it's like the halfway point. And after calf, you have lamed. Yeah? So that spells Qal. Spells Qal. They're consecutive,
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle. So it's like having Gakka and Lalla. And we
Mm.
know that Gakka and Lalla will give us Qal. It would also give us 6 next to 33, like this inversion of 36, right? 63, the sifr, the zero.
Mm.
So it's as if the order of the Hebrew sound forms is giving us a bit of an insight. And one of the reasons why I think this is, and in my opinion, it proves it, is because Shri Guru Nanak is that same being that essentially gave rise to those sound forms,
Wow.
essentially. I believe that. Proving that is a different matter, and I'm not looking to spend my life proving that. Um, because I've got other interests. Like we're trying to do Langar for the children here, which in many ways I would argue is more useful. Um, but what I would say is that what I've decided to do is to do tracts. That's very convenient for me because it allows me to like just focus on one little aspect, do a lot of geometry, do just a little bit of writing, and then I could do videos where I talk about that tract as a sideshow, and
Mm.
more comes out, and then it avoids me having to write lots of books, but gives people a reference point,
The
a
structure.
framework I can then keep referring back to. I don't know if I can bring up apps and you can see them on the screen, but I can bring something up to show you, like
Yeah, we could
if
try share your screen. If not, we can always show them afterwards in editing.
yeah, oh yeah, I can send that to you, but I've got like the keynote presentations on here. So that's what the tract is going to be. It's going to allow me to like do my own videos if I want talking through it. It's going to be free because anyone who
Thank you.
and here's another thing about Nanak and um, I didn't want to say it way back, but anyone who asks for money to do Parachar is going to face problems in the end. I'm
Mm.
sorry.
And I
You know.
think I just want to go back to one point because I think it'd be really useful for the Sangat, which would be we mentioned Gavier, which was like the sun, and also seeing that all of these things are emitting, whether it be a geometry or frequency, but now we are seeing Gavier from another lens, which is like capital, right? And that's emitting its own Gavier, and that not might not be. It does have a certain emission, but just recognizing that emission and being sensitive to that emission where we weren't before, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean. Would
like
that
if
make
you
sense?
yeah, like you've made me think about a pangati, huh? A ba ang, huh? To
Mm.
create or instill a limb. Interesting. Bhakti. Each of our lines in Gurbani are referred to as that. Where Maharaj is asked by the Siddhs. So the Siddhs are seen as the most physically advanced yogis. They're doing all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of magic tricks sitting on a mountain. And Guru Nanak Sahib has written this composition. It's called Siddha Gosht, which means
Yes.
conversation with the Siddhs. And Siddh also means not just the yogis, but it means like essentially mental powers. I don't call them spiritual powers because they're not. Uh,
Mental.
you know, they're mental. They use mental energy. Their impact is on the mental realm, manipulating our own mind or others. Beyond that, they're nothing. That's why Gurbani does the opposite, actually, of what other traditions do. It actually decries the use and abuse, because most use is actually abuse of it. But Maharaj, as either a 7 or 8 year old, um, they appeared all of a sudden, and they were very young, and we can tell they were very young because these individuals started saying, "Oh, who are you, this child? And you've turned up, Barak, you're a child, and you've turned up. How is this even happening, in it, huh?" And then what happens is we have a series of questions and answers where the format is that the Siddhs ask questions and Guru Sahib responds. There's a particular point where they ask, "Who is your Guru?" That you're the Chella of, Hana? The Chella, that you've law yourself, your consciousness, you've attached it to Challa, that you're proceeding according to. Hana? And Maharaj says something beautiful. Maharaj says, Shabad Guru Surat Tona Challa. And Maharaj continues, but if we just stop there. So Maharaj says, Shabad, the Sh, void, Ab, beginning, Ad, procession of time, Ad. I can't see anything apart from that. And we know Shabad doesn't just mean vibration. It also refers to Gurbani. A Shabad is a verse of Gurbani. And not just that, when you get Shabad with an Ankar underneath it, and this is now going to Gurbani Vyakaran, grammar, which is a separate subject, I believe, and people like me, grammarians who are into the grammar, they believe that actually refers to Naam. Because now Shabad, which is a noun, is now a singular noun because they're Ankar. So if it's an Ankar there, the word Shabad there doesn't mean Gurbani as in verses of Gurbani, and it doesn't just mean like a vibration, it means Naam, Gurmantar. So Maharaj says, Shabad Guru, Suratona Challa. So Maharaj says the vibration, the Shabad, now we know there's multiple meanings there. Shabad Guru, that is my teacher. Now look at that Shabad emanating out of the darkness, Gu, where the light comes out from. Like even the procession, void Sha, Abba beginning, the procession of time, Gu, darkness, Ru, light. Like Maharaj is giving a sequence, creation sequence. Shabad Guru Suratun Chela. Now we know Sur means sun. We talked about the numbers. That's beautiful. The idea of, so like Maharaj is using a spiritual allegory, but it's matching the physical allegory. And the universe is fractal, right? So we're going to find these interrelationships. We're going to know 72 won't just relate to this. Your blood cell is 7.2 microns wide. So these things, they just keep repeating at many, many, many levels. Shabad Guru Surat Tunjala. So Surat, it seems that if we put the term At, which sounds like 8, by the way, At, it actually suggests the extent of something. So now Surat consciousness, the extent. Surat Tuna Chella. Now tun sounds like a vibration. Tunni, tun, Tuni, Surat Tuna Chella, that my consciousness, my surti, is the Chella of the Tunni, the vibration. Tun means vibration.
Wow.
So Maharaj is essentially saying that my teacher is this thing, is Shabad, which is a beautiful word. That's like a Persian word. And even before the Persian, the Arabi, who knows? We're going into like Zoroastrianism probably. And for those who want to study the connection between Indic terms and call it Persian or Iraq, Iranian, Babylonian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian, call it what you want. These names have changed. But what they need to do, they need to study the Avestan culture, Avestan, of, to incarnate, vast form, Avestan culture. Now, that's where you, around 4, maybe 5,000, even more years ago, see through the language of the Indus Valley and that area I spoke about, which they really want to go into war around about now, right? That's where you see that the language is very similar. The language is very similar. So it's not just the fact that you have, these odes to the sky and the universe, and then some people are doing it monotheistically. But you have fire, and you have things being sacrificed to the fire. So these similarities aren't just for no reason. That the language, of these geographical locations, they were intermingling. So there was a priestly class. In the Zoroastrianism, there's a priestly class, the Brahman, which sounds like Brahma. So these connections are there. Now, when you mention like mindful, one thing we can't do, and this is why I mentioned that Pankti from Guru Sahib. Guru Sahib, when we jump Naam, as thoughts arise, as words emerge, let's just say that we don't go off on our little jollies with those thoughts. That what happens is there's a centering. Even the Gurbani, the meanings that Gurbani takes on, that those unravel in such beautiful ways. It's very unspeakable. But what we have to remember is that this shouldn't be something where we sit there getting paranoid. You could join the dots all day long and become some sort of paranoid schizophrenic. going around convinced that the TV's talking to you. If we would take this to its logical conclusion, and by the way, the term logos, where logic comes from, and notice that logic ends with ik and begins with law, light, iron, blood, whatever, is the Greek term for nam. So if we take this to the logical conclusion, it's not actually helpful. No, what I'm really saying is, Shabad Guru Suratan Challa. Look, if we make the Shabad Guru, which is to say that we take the perfect teacher and Vaheguru becomes our teacher, Suratuna Challa, that our Surati becomes a disciple of that vibration. And while that Utat Betat Sovatanam, so we know that Gurmat tells us that Nam is something which happens automatically. If it's not at the beginning, certainly eventually it will happen automatically. You know? Maharaj is telling us that this is a constant practice. You know, through our breath, through our blood, through the actual iron. You know? You know, the sun produces 7 particular elements. Element, obviously, from the term El, Hebrew for God. And the last and final one of these is iron. After that, it can't produce anything heavier.
Wow.
So, you know, even the constellation Orion, or Iron, or Iran Iron, and Aryan, and iron ore meaning liquid iron, but I don't need to tell you what ore also means. These are hints as to what materials were involved in what you could call, you know, cosmic genesis. You know, notice the word cosmic ends with the ik, begins with ka, you know, and has an om in the middle, cosmic. So it's a Greek term. You know, this isn't by coincidence. Like, I'll give you an example. The penny really drops when we realize that what we have to do is we have to let go of the world of form by attaching to the formless, and Guru Nanak, not the Countess, gives us that technology. However, we are also taking part in the world of form. So what really happens is that if we're at one with Nam, then all of the vibrations are lower than that. All of the physicality, all of the words. For a person who's at one with Nam, the word, that's why they call it the word, because it's not the any old words, it's the word. That's what's called the name Hashem, because it's not any other names. It's the one that gave rise to all this other stuff. Then everything else comes underneath that. So when we look at the physical realm subjugating itself to Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, who imprinted 5 fingers into a rock coming down a mountain, I would argue that that's because, let alone the physical realm, the mental realm, because Guru Sahib is at the peak. Guru Sahib is where there are many, many realms before that even manifests. Maharaj is operating from another place, essentially, but that place is here, it's everywhere. Like, we'll eventually realize, through Guru Sahib's care, we're going to eventually realize that it's more a case of dharma, gyan, sharma, karma, as such. It's not a case of, oh, there's these hierarchical levels. Remember what Maharaj says? Maharaj gives us lots of clues. Nanak uttam neech na koe. So we can see this in so many beautiful ways. So let's imagine us with 7 chakras. Let's imagine 7 hells and 7 hells. And Gurbani mentions that. That's not, Gurbani agrees with that concept. It's mentioned so many times. Now we have these 7 chakras, we have these 7 hells and these 7, and that's 777. Sat Prab Soi. Maharaj says in Gurbani. Now what's really beautiful is that we can also now, with this series of 3 sevens, find something really beautiful. It turns out that planet Earth has 3 vibratory rates. The first one is roughly 7 hertz. The second one is roughly 14. And the third one is roughly 21. Now, these aren't coincidences. And the fact that when you add up all these numbers, they equal 42 isn't a coincidence. Because 42 degrees is the angle that our eyes have to sit, the corner angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. 42 degrees. So is this big rock trying to tell us about something formless and how it works? Yes. Now, Guru Gobind Singh Ji passed away at the age of 42, and the word 42 is Sa. We encountered it when we mentioned the first Rag. Remember that, yeah? So why? Now, what's really crazy is if we imagine chakras 6 times 7 transcending, 6 times 7 is 42. Now, the other thing is that the reason for this is all to do with water. And the way it operates in water operates in glass. I'll eventually, in my tracks, be using glass prisms to prove this, or in videos. But when you take a dome. So you're looking at Earth's mechanics. We can't go into why it makes sense to use semicircles to discuss Earth's mechanics. That's maybe for the future. But if you do that and you shine a light into the center, what happens is only when it's 40 degrees does it bounce back out. Otherwise, it absorbs it. So there's something very mystical about that angle. Okay. Now, the reason why we see a rainbow is that it just so happens that those rain droplets are at a certain level that means that the angle of inclination hits 42 degrees. And now those water droplets as spheres are taking that clear light, because light isn't white, that clear light, right? And what they're doing, what it's doing is it's deflecting it internally and then releasing it at different speeds, because the different spectral, encoding the word ek in the middle, they are made up of different frequencies. And so what do? We see a rainbow which has 7 lights, which not by coincidence are related to our chakras. It's not a coincidence the middle one is green, and it's the heart chakra. And har means harya, means green, as well as ever blossoming, the most common used term for Maharaj in Gurbani. None of these things are a coincidence. So there's another example of us trying to prove that, in this case, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza is a computer because it's giving us calculations. And I'd argue that the Darbar Sahib, and I'm looking to prove this, that the Darbar Sahib itself is a computer in that sense. The way you understand computers has to change. That, in other words, what it does is it gives us the necessary information, whether we put information or we take it out, to give us calculations. Notice the word calculation has "call" at the beginning. There is none of this is coincidences. None of it is coincidences. Let's take the bar side, for instance. Here's the parkarma. It's a square, yeah. However, the entrances are here. So actually, it's a square and then another inverted square. Now that square within a square is found on lots of tiles, that geometry in the bar side. But what that really, because those are doors, the entrances are here, here, and here, but the walkway is here, here, and here. So actually, that gives us 2 squares, right? Now, when you add up all the angles inside those 2 squares, you get 360 degrees times 2, which is 720 degrees. Looks a lot like 72 0, but also 720 is the sum of all of the base angles of the pentagram, which I argue is the idea of Nam manifesting as duality. So BD, 72 degrees, Midi is required because of BD. And by the way, the terms meaty and I won't go into that. He's too much. So we can perhaps now see why Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, having done some temporal things, battling war, 72 injuries, everyone, decided to release their Kamar Kasa. There's this idea that Maharaj is now going to only focus on the PD. Right?
So Miri Piri, there's also like a balance there. That's why Piri is standing taller, because there also must be some sort of significance with time as well as geometry.
It's beautiful because if you take the first letters, Ma, Ba, mother, father, I mean, we could go deep. If you take Mumma 30, Papa 26, that equals 56, equals Nanak. And also if you add Midi Pidi, you get 120, which is the internal angle of the hexagon, which is as above, so below, 2 triangles, So there's a massive, and after all, this is a 6th guru. A hexagon, you could say, is 6 manifesting, So when we start looking at why there are Charlie Mukhtar, we know that Rag is 40, we know Guru is 40, and look at the word for 40, it's Challi. Now the term Gur Challi appears in Gurbani to say the path of the Guru, and Gur equals 40, and Challi is the word for 40. And you just sit there and you think, Maharaj. Initially, I thought, Maharaj, I think I'm going mad here, so I'm just going to stay quiet. And then let's just say that Maharaj, if they really want people to talk about something, it doesn't matter if you're someone who doesn't want to talk. I'm actually an introvert. You wouldn't believe that I talk. But then Maharaj will say that, no, you might be an introvert, but if I need the ek talking about, well, then you're going to be an extrovert, Yeah, an introvert, whether we say internal formulas, well, an extrovert is going to have to manifest exoskeleton, in quotes, ek. See, even the word X, the letter X, what was the point of X? You see, they take, it doesn't do it with X-ray. We'll start that with E. X-ray,
Amazing. I think this would be an amazing point to leave the Sangat, leave yours, because we've covered so much this morning. I know it's afternoon now for you. Um,
Problem.
I am very, very grateful to hold the space to share. Um, thank you for all of this. I hope the listeners as well. If anything comes up for you from this, please reach out to Athma Singh. Would you like to share where people can
And
reach out for you? What can they expect in the future? And if you also have any messages for people listening to this
Anji.
as well.
Anji, so at the moment, thank you, Paisa, for that opportunity. So at the moment, I'm only active on Instagram. I will eventually be active on YouTube, but I'm trying to see if there's other people who are happy to do the editing and everything. Because I'm not looking to make any profit. And then I can kind of like, essentially share the information that they're presenting in many ways. But at the moment, it would all be Instagram. So my account is called Trimorphic, but the way that is actually spelled is TR1. So that's the number one. TR1 MORPH1K. So it's TR1 MORPH1K. So it looks like it's spelling trimorphic, but it's got
Perfect.
1, 1, 11, and
I'll put that
the
in the description below, and I'll put it on the screen as well so people can see.
and in terms of plans, so I'm working on 3 or 4 tracks at the moment. I mean, I mentioned earlier why, because it's more convenient for me, because I do have 3 children. I do have a wife. We are currently trying to get residency, eventually buy land, build a house. But at the moment, we're trying to very quickly start Langar Seva. So if anyone's interested in donating money for Langar Seva, please get in touch. You can get in touch with that account. I won't give you another account to complicate things for you. So that's where you can see. So the tracts will be not for profit. I don't believe if knowledge is actually sacred, it's divine, then we should never charge money for that. And that's actually a Gurmat tradition, not to charge money for prachar and not to charge money for kirtan. Nowadays, all these kirtanis flying around like pop stars, getting their tickets paid for. Even kirtanis accepting money as they're going around left, right, and center. And I don't want to get in a conversation of how they're supposed to survive. Well, Guru Sahib weaved baskets, Guru Sahib did other things. Take a hint. And you're telling me you'll do more prachar than Guru Sahib? So before we go around doing para meaning use of a universal, char meaning to align or to clear, and notice that that is also the word for number 4. What we have to do is we have to think to ourselves, well, what am I doing? And that would essentially be my response to your third point there, as in, do you have a message for the Sangat? And the message I have for the Sangat is Sangat ji, treat the Guru Sangha as one. Don't get attached to individuals while you read Gurbani and have a thirst to meet Sant, Sa, breath, Ant, extent of, someone who has transcended the extent of their breath, because they have merged with Nam. Wish to meet Nam, then the type of Gursikhs, then the type of Gurmukhs, then the type of Sants, because it basically means the same thing. Then they will be people who take you to Nam. They will be true because they have gone beyond the extent of the Ant of Sa. So as the Sangat Sa'at, you're supposed to become a Santana. So essentially, one way we can understand this is like, look, treat everyone as lower and at the same level as Maharaj is higher as one. And if we do this, we won't become fans of certain individuals. Like I'm a fan. I'm a total fanboy. You give me anything written by Sahib Ranveer Singh. You give me anything written by Baba Gurbachan Singh Pindramale. You give me anything written by Professor Sahib Singh. I could name 1 or 2 other names. Mate, I'm a fanboy. As in, I'm like, mate, these are special people. But look at why they were special. Because everything that they were given through the practice of Nam Abhyas. Abhyas means practice, but it comes from the ancient Semitic term Abhyahat, which means nectar. That they had encountered the nectar within. And as a result, what's essentially happening is that whatever knowledge is being blessed upon them, they're becoming more and more humble. And without the guru, this does not occur. It does not occur that if either someone will become a gurmukh or they become a manmukh. There is no middle ground. Maharaj has no word for the middle. Maharaj says sanmukh, which echoes the word sun, and that means gurmukh, conversation for another day. How it means to Sanskrit. Skrit means skriti, means script, is where the word script came from. But But what we have to understand is that until we sit around there and think, why isn't there sangat full of sons? Why are there these pop stars that just want to attract attention? Is that what a sant is? Huh? Monetize things, get people worshipping and want to look different from everyone else. Is that what a sant is? Huh? Why isn't it? And by sab sangat ji, I would say it's because we don't really know how to do sangat anymore. We don't know how to do Sangat. And if we knew how to do Sangat, we'd become like Sangat. And then in the Sangat, when we encountered the Gurumukhs, there'd be a multiplier effect, a multiplier effect. And perhaps this is why originally Gurmukh sat around Maharaj. Maharaj was the dot at the center, and we were the circle. And this tradition is still there at Darbar Sahib. And I've looked at it mathematically. It actually means that sound waves can physically penetrate people's bodies more, as opposed to the lateral linear setup, which is essentially an implication as to people taking over churches in the West. The aisle setup was like that. So
We
they were
actually
just
talked about this, funnily enough, and with Dr. Kamarup in the last podcast, that it was like the sun and the solar system where people are basically orbiting as family units and that vibration affecting everybody. So amazing.
orb, orbit, or Hebrew light, ba secondary, something coming out of the first, it left of the last letters. So we really, really can't get away from the fact that all of these scientific terms, all of these understandings, they didn't just come from gibberish. Like if I want to invent a new word or a new term, I could do it. I could go, right, you see the word sun, I don't like that. I'm going to call it. Now, I could call it that and people could copy me, but I'm going to say they would need a lot of faith in me. And I'd say it's misplaced faith to use that word because I can't tell them why I called it that. Why have I called it that? What is even the purpose of a name?
Mm-hmm.
What is the purpose of a name? And however, if I'm able to say to them, this is called the sun because look, check this out. Here's the sikha of it. It's because this is its behavior, this is how it looks, and then you get a ancestry, a lineage of words, and you can trace them back. And this is ultimately why I believe Latin has done what it's done, created this a dual, in some cases almost triplicate phonetics, like I showed you the term, the sound form C. And none of these things are coincidences. So, okay, so just finally, I've gone off on a tangent, but Sangaji, all I wanted to say was listen to people, but listen to everyone. And then ultimately listen to no one and listen to no one apart from your heart and that practice of Nam. And another thing is that people do a lot of Sangat with other people, but people aren't doing their own Kamai. When you notice that these Puratan Gursiks, Puratan, complete sun, beautiful. These Gurmukhs, they would do a lot of bhakti by themselves as well. So it wasn't just a case of, right, I'll go to like the classic is Ranspai. Ranspai means night and day, basically. And it's a beautiful concept. It's mentioned in Gurbani, where a particular queen goes to her Ranspai and her husband, a Sakhi is mentioned. Actually, I take that back. I don't know if it's directly referred to, but I've got a feeling that Sakhi is directly referred to and Ranspai is used. But here's the thing, whoever, and I used to go to lots of Ranspais, but if a Ranspai becomes the exception, and my life outside of that is a normalness, I have to be very careful because what I'm doing is I'm moving away from the taruf. Taruf has the term ru in there. Now the problem is that I can wear my bana, I can sing Geet, all the rest of it. But if I'm not actively remembering Guru Sahib while I'm taking a shit, yes, while I'm eating, utat betat sovat naam ko nanak jan ke aisa kam is sukhmani, awake, eating, sleeping. Nanak says that these are the actions, constantly naam. While they're with their wife or husband, you understand what I'm getting at? Atte pair. And by the way, a pair, which is 3 hours, equals 10,800 seconds or something. Even the term pair isn't a coincidence. Huh? Dividing the day up into sets of 3 hours, giving us 8 sections. Ultimately, Sangatji, what I'm saying is so much of the stuff that I'm talking about, it arose because I think Maharaj helped me understand how to do Sangat. I'm not perfect, but when I went to Sangat, I didn't look for an individual. I had this major impression that the Sangat is wherever the energetic vibration is here today. That's my Sangat today, collectively. And that every single face, is Guru Sahib's roop, facing me. And I'm not going to go into things because some things are very private, but I'm going to say this. If Maharaj wants to manifest and appear in front of you, even as a human being, Maharaj will do it. Maharaj will do anything it takes to give us our understanding. Hannah. Maharaj is very, very mystical. Maharaj did it by Joga Singh, by the way. Did that very thing that I've spoken about, Hannah. And this is the care that Maharaj plays with us. And the problem is that with that in mind, are we seeing Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji as Parataka Guru? This is another problem. You know, the fact that we started printing Maharaj's Swarup, how much of the Sangat are saying, I'm never going to print Maharaj's Swarup? No, that's wrong. I'm going to do what was originally done. How many people are saying that I'm only going to read from the Rivar? I mean, I might be sounding hardcore, but we're really saying, how do we do Sangat? Well, we have to say, how do we do Sangat of Guru Sahib? And if we've decided that we're going to bring Guru Sahib down to our level, I can't read Gurbani, let's break the words apart. You know, we can't be bothered to do Larivar Sarups, handwrite them. There's over 200 Sarups. I've seen them with my own eyes, handwritten Larivar Sarups in Darbar Sahib, collecting dust, doing nothing. So what we've really done is that unfortunately, but this is destiny. That's why I'm going to say that the 24th of Tar, while starting off really beautiful, Guru Sahib ends up being defeated by ego. That's the Khalsa. That's the Punjabi law. And you know that, if people hear that, some people are going to get offended by me. But for me, I personally believe that whatever limited understanding I've been given, that's actually what Maharaj was actually trying to say with the Niklanki of Dar. That actually the Niklanki of Dar started out, as essentially this perfect teacher manifesting with many limbs as a Khalsa, but eventually the Khalsa lost. And then Niklanki has, because ultimately Vaheguru doesn't also manifest in any form. Now, this is a paradox. This isn't something for conversation. This is something that is dealt with through Simran. And that's unspeakable. This paradox, the understanding of it is found within the heart of a Gurmukh. Outside of the heart of a Gurmukh, I've not seen it.
I think that's a beautiful place to leave the Sangat with. That's the inward journey, and to learn how to do Sangat. And I think you've explained that quite beautifully throughout. So thank you again. I'm really grateful for the space, for the time to share this. Episode 36, as we said.
Wow, that's crazy, isn't it?
So, yeah, thank you everybody for watching as well. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.